1879. The sun, a hammered copper coin, beat down on Ash Hollow, Wyoming territory. It was high noon, a time when shadows died and the grit, a fine red powder, seemed to hang suspended in the air, waiting for a reason to move. The only sounds were the lazy buzz of flies around the livery and the distant, tinny thump of a piano from the Last Chance Saloon, played by a man who knew only 3 songs and was tired of all of them. The street was wide, built for cattle drives that seldom came, and lined with false-fronted buildings bleached to the color of bone. In front of Hart Freight Post, the air didn't just hang, it coiled. Barclay Voss stood in the center of that coil. He was a man built of beef and bourbon, the owner of the bank, the High Horn Ranch, and, by extension, the town itself. His vest was tailored silk, though dusty, and in his right hand he held a leather riding quirt. Facing him was Evelyn Hart. She owned the freight house. She was the postmistress. She was, in this town, a rare thing solvent, or she had been. Her hair, the color of dark honey, was pulled back tight, and her face was smudged with the dust of her own ledgers. The terms were clear. Mr. Voss, Evelyn said, her voice low but carrying in the heat. The extension was agreed upon. I have the paperwork. Paperwork. Voss spat the word. He disliked paper he didn't own. Paperwork is a suggestion. Miss Hart, reality is the suggestion I am making now. You will sell the depot to me, at the price I offered. My price is final, Evelyn said. And it is not the insult you handed me. Insolence, Voss corrected her. He shifted his weight, the leather of his gun belt creaking. He didn't reach for the gun. He didn't need to. You are a woman running a man's business, and you are running it into the ground. My ground. It's my ground, she countered, until the note is paid, and the note is not due. Voss smiled. It was a brief, unpleasant flash of gold fillings. It is due when I say it is. He took a step. She stood firm. She did not see the quirt rise. She only felt the air tear apart beside her ear, followed by a white-hot line of pain across her cheek. The sound of it, a sharp, wet crack, was louder than a gunshot. The force of the blow was not a slap. It was a fist's worth of weighted leather. It snapped her head back and sent her stumbling, her ankle twisting. She fell, hard, her shoulder and hip striking the splintered boardwalk. Silence. The piano in the saloon stopped mid-note. The blacksmith's hammer, ringing seconds before, ceased. Every man on the street, the miners, the ranchers, the drifters, found something fascinating about their own boots, or the heat haze on the horizon. They were flies trapped in amber, held fast by a fear they understood perfectly. Evelyn tasted blood and the red grit of the street. She pushed a strand of hair from her eyes. The world tilting, she saw, across the way, Sheriff Amos Keeler. He was on the shaded porch of the saloon, a glass in his hand. He saw her fall. He saw the blood. He looked down, frowned at a spot on his tin star, and began to polish it, very slowly, on the sleeve of his shirt. He was a man paid to keep the peace, and Barclay Voss was the peace. Voss looked down at Evelyn, his shadow covering her. He raised the quirt again, just slightly, admiring the single drop of red that stained the braided tip. One of his men, a thick-necked drover named Cale, stepped forward, reaching down to haul Evelyn to her feet. He was grinning. A sound cut the air, not a gunshot, a clean, singing hiss. It came from the alleyway between the assayer's office and the general store. A man had been standing there, unnoticed, leaning against the brickwork. He was tall, leaner than Voss, and dressed in the quiet browns of the trail. His hat was pulled low, its brim wide and stained with alkali and sweat. He hadn't seemed to move, but a rope, a neatly coiled lariat, had sprung from his hand. It didn't aim for Cale's neck or body. The loop, small and tight, snapped closed around Cale's right wrist, the one reaching for Evelyn. The stranger didn't pull hard. He just braced, anchoring the rope. Cale, moving forward, was jerked to a halt as if he'd hit a wall. The momentum spun him, and he crashed backward into a watering trough, landing with a heavy splash that sent muddy water spilling into the dust. The stranger, Rowan Pike, let the rope fall slack. He walked forward, his boots making no sound in the thick dust. He stopped 10 feet from Voss, his posture relaxed, his hands nowhere near the worn Colt revolver at his hip. He looked at Evelyn, still on the ground, then at Voss. His voice was low, rough, like stones rolling in a dry creek bed. She gets up. Voss, momentarily stunned by the audacity, recovered. He turned his full attention to the stranger. "Who in the hell are you?" Rowan ignored the question. He kept his eyes on Voss, but his words were for the town. "He won't do it again." The silence that followed was different. It was not the silence of fear. It was the sharp, metallic quiet of a cooling gun barrel. It was the silence of calculation. Cale sputtered in the trough, but no one looked at him. Voss let out a short, cold laugh. It was a sound with no humor in it. "Won't he?" With a sudden, violent motion, Voss drew his own pistol. It was a silver-plated Schofield, ornate and deadly. He didn't aim at Rowan. He didn't aim at Evelyn. He fired straight into the air. The explosion was deafening. It shattered the stillness, sent horses rearing at their hitching posts, and made the men on the street flinch. A woman screamed from an open window. "This is my town," Voss bellowed, the smoke curling from his barrel. "The law in this town is the sound of my voice. Anyone who forgets that, farmer or drifter, will be reminded. You," he jabbed the pistol toward Rowan, "will be on the next horse out, or the next pine box." Rowan hadn't moved. He hadn't flinched at the shot, slowly, using her own strength. Evelyn pushed herself up. She got to one knee, then to her feet. She did not wipe the blood from her lip. She did not straighten her skirt. She stood, swaying slightly, and met Voss's glare. The fire in her eyes was brighter than the Wyoming sun. "The law," Evelyn said, her voice shaking but unbroken, "is still the law, even here, even for you." Voss stared at her, his face darkening with rage. He saw the stranger. "Rowan, take one half step back, a subtle shift of weight. It wasn't a retreat, it was the stance of a man settling in." His right hand now hung naturally, just inches from the dark, scarred wood grip of his Colt. It was the posture of a man who had not just practiced drawing, but had done it when it mattered. The tension stretched, thin and humming. It was about to break. "Now, hold on." Sheriff Amos Keeler came bustling down the saloon steps, his face slick with sweat. He was late, and he knew it. He put his hands up, palms out, a peacemaker who had already chosen his side. "Barkley, put that iron away. It's too hot for this." He glanced at Rowan. "And you, friend, just ease down. We don't need trouble." Voss looked at the sheriff, then at Rowan, then back to Evelyn. He saw the faces watching. He had made his point with the quirt. The stranger had made one with the rope, but Voss held the last card. He smiled again. That same cold, metallic flash. He lowered the Schofield and slid it back into its holster. "You're right, Sheriff, no trouble." He looked straight at Evelyn, his voice dropping to a conversational, venomous tone. "Just business. Consider your extension voided. Miss Hart, your note is called in full." Evelyn's face went pale beneath the blood and dust. "You can't. That's not legal." "It is now." Voss turned to the crowd. "End of the month. That's when the bank takes possession. Anyone who does business with Hart Freight between now and then, well, I'd have to check their own accounts. Carefully." He nodded to his man Cale, who was climbing miserably from the trough. Voss turned his back on Rowan, the ultimate insult, and walked calmly back toward the bank, his boots leaving deep, proprietary prints in the dust. The crowd dissolved, melting back into doorways and alleys. The show over, the verdict delivered. Sheriff Keeler sighed, wiping his brow. "Well," he said to the empty air, "that's settled." He retreated to the shade of the saloon porch. Evelyn and Rowan were left alone in the harsh sunlight. The street was quiet again, save for the resumed, frantic pounding of the blacksmith's hammer, trying to make up for lost time. Evelyn stood for a long moment, breathing hard. The line on her cheek was already beginning to swell, turning a dark purple. She reached up, not to touch the wound, but to pull the edges of her light duster jacket closed, a gesture of composing herself, of re-armoring. She turned her bright, furious eyes on the tall stranger. He was coiling his rope, his movements economical and precise. She did not thank him. Gratitude was a luxury. This was currency. "If you're going to interfere in my business," Evelyn Hart said, her voice as hard as ironwood, "you will see it through." He followed her inside. The heavy oak door of Hart Freight Post shut with a solid, definitive sound, cutting off the white glare of the street. The air inside was cool, heavy with purpose. It smelled of pine tar for sealing crates, the rich, dark spice of coffee beans in their burlap sacks, and the dry, grassy scent of jute rope. It was the smell of commerce, of survival, a sharp contrast to the iron tang of blood in her mouth. A young woman, Josie Milburn, looked up from behind the postal counter, her expression of mild inquiry freezing into sharp horror. "Evelyn," Josie breathed, rushing forward. Her eyes were fixed on the raw, purpled welt on Evelyn's cheek, already beginning to swell. He struck you. I'm fine. Josie." Evelyn's voice was brittle. She walked past her assistant, her stride stiff, refusing to limp though her hip ached from the fall. She moved behind the main counter, placing her hands on the familiar, worn wood, grounding herself. Josie's hands clenched into small, white fists. She was a slip of a girl, but her loyalty was boundless. That animal, and Sheriff Keeler, he just stood there. He watched. "Keeler did what Keeler is paid to do," Evelyn said. She focused on straightening a stack of waybills, her fingers moving with forced precision. "Which is nothing." Rowan Pike stood near the door, his hat still on, his lariat coiled neatly in his left hand. He was an interruption, a piece of the violent outdoors that had followed her into her sanctuary. He watched her, his gaze missing nothing the tremor in her hands, the rigidity of her spine as she fought the pain. Evelyn finally looked at him. The professionalism she used as armor snapped back into place. "You had business here." He moved, not toward her, but toward the shelves of goods that lined the wall. "Need coffee?" he said, his voice quiet in the enclosed space. "A pound, if you have it, and ammunition, .44 caliber." It was a test, a way to normalize the last 5 minutes, to bridge the gap between the violence on the street and her command. Evelyn nodded, turning. "We have Arbuckles. The shells are Winchester." She scooped the beans into a paper sack, weighed them on the brass scale, and retrieved a box of cartridges from a locked drawer beneath the counter. She placed them on the wood between them. She did not wince as she reached, though her shoulders screamed from the impact. She slid her main ledger toward her, dipped her pen, and noted the sale with a steady hand. "That'll be 40 cents for the coffee, 90 for the shells, $1.30. She said it as if he were any other customer, as if he hadn't just put a rope on Barclay Voss's man, as if Voss hadn't just declared war on her in front of the entire town. Rowan placed the coins on the counter. His fingers, calloused and long, brushed the wood. He didn't pick up his goods. Josie, still vibrating with anger, broke the tense, domestic silence. "It's the water. Evelyn, that's what this is. Old man Hemlock told me this morning when he picked up his mail. Voss is buying up the deeds for every patch of dirt that touches Dry Willow Creek. He's choking the water rights." Evelyn froze, the pen still in her hand. Hemlock. And the Davidsons, he called their note early too, same as he just did to you. They couldn't pay. They're packing up by week's end. He offered them 10 cents on the dollar for their land, and they took it. They said they lost their water access last week. Dry Willow Creek. It was the only reliable water source for the smaller ranches south of town. Her freight business, her entire livelihood, relied on those ranches. If they folded, she folded. "He can't call the notes early," Evelyn said, but the certainty was gone from her voice. The blood drained from her face, leaving the bruise in stark, ugly relief against her pale skin. "He just did," Josie said miserably. Evelyn turned. She walked to the back of the office, to the heavy, black iron safe that bore her father's initials. Her movements were jerky now, the adrenaline fading and the throbbing ache setting in. She worked the combination, her fingers fumbling once before the tumblers clicked into place. The door swung open with a heavy, oiled groan. She pulled out a thick leather-bound ledger and the folded, crisp document of her own loan agreement with the Voss Bank. She carried them back to the desk, spreading the contract open under the light of the window. Rowan watched her. He had not moved from his spot. Evelyn scanned the document, her finger tracing the lines of dense script, her heart pounding against her ribs. "Here," she said, her voice tight with a terrible, rising hope. "Section 4, payment due in full on the 1st of August, 1881. No clause for early collection, no exceptions for fluctuating assets. He can't call it. But he did." Rowan's voice was soft. "Because he thinks I'll roll over. Because he thinks I won't read my own contract." Evelyn was turning the pages of the ledger now, her mind racing. "The payments. Everyone is noted." Then she saw it. It wasn't in the contract itself. It was in the main account ledger, on the page detailing her outstanding account with the Voss Bank. Tucked at the bottom of the column, dated 3 weeks prior, was an addendum, a note, written in a cramped, precise hand, authorizing a variance in terms based on secured assets. It was the ink that caught her eye. Her own entries, her father's entries, were all in standard black or deep brown. This edition was written in a stark, bright blue. It screamed from the page. "He altered the ledger," she whispered. It was a forgery, a blatant, arrogant lie inserted into her own books, likely by the bank clerk during his last review of her accounts. Rowan had moved closer, drawn by the shift in her voice. He wasn't looking at the ledger, not at first. He was looking at her. He'd seen her expression shift from defiant to hunted, and now to a cold, focused rage. He leaned slightly, just enough to see the page. His eyes rested on the blue ink for a fraction of a second. He looked back up. "Who?" Rowan Pike asked, his voice barely above the sound of the dust motes dancing in the sunbeam. "Handles the telegraph wire in Ash Hollow." The question was so precise, so unexpected. It cut straight through Evelyn's panic. She stared at him. "Marta Green. Why?" "Blue ink," he said. "Railroad shipping manifests use it, and telegraph offices. They get it in bulk from the Union Pacific, standard issue." Josie, who had been watching the exchange, suddenly understood. Marta, she'd be the only other person in town with that ink, unless Voss supplied it to his clerk. Evelyn finished, her mind clicking into place. "Marta, she's terrified of Voss, if he's using her office to send messages, or to get supplies." Josie turned on Evelyn, her fear now channeled into urgent practicality. "You can't stay here, Evelyn. Not now. And you must make that Boulder's Rise shipment tomorrow." Evelyn rubbed her temples, the sting of the quirt pulsing in time with her heart. The shipment? With Voss calling her note? The payment from the mining company was the only capital she had left. "It's dynamite and blasting caps. It has to go. And Voss knows it." Josie insisted. "He'll stop you. He'll send Cale, or worse. You can't ride that wagon alone, not after today." Evelyn looked at her hands, stained with her father's ink and now her own dried blood. She hated this, hated the weakness of needing help, the shame of being a target. The town would talk. Evelyn Hart, hiring muscle, can't protect her own. But then she looked at the bruise in the small mirror behind the counter. She looked at the stark blue ink in her ledger. This was not about pride. This was about survival. She turned to Rowan. He was bagging his coffee, his ammunition already pocketed. He was waiting. "The shipment to Boulder's Rise leaves at dawn," Evelyn said, her voice flat. "All business. It's a 2-day round trip. Hard riding." He nodded, waiting for the price. "I can't pay much. Voss has seen to that." She took a breath, the words tasting like ash. $1 a day, plus board, such as it is. It was a poor offer for a man who could handle a rope like that. It was barely wagon driver wages, not a bodyguard's. She was offering him a pittance to stand between her and the most powerful man in the territory. Rowan Pike looked at her for a long time. He saw the swelling on her face, the defiance in her posture, and the desperate calculation in her eyes. He saw the woman who had faced down Barclay Voss with nothing but words, and who was now, against her own nature, asking for help. His nod was short, almost imperceptible, a simple dip of his chin, but his gaze, which had been as hard and flat as the prairie, changed. It softened, just for a half-second. It was a look that acknowledged her pain and her strength, in equal measure. "I'll stow my gear at the livery," he said. "Be here before sunrise." He turned to leave. Evelyn let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. As Rowan reached for the door handle, a shadow fell across the floorboards, eclipsing the beam of sunlight. Both of them froze. Outside, standing on the boardwalk, his bulk blocking the light, was Barclay Voss. He was staring through the glass of the front window, his face unreadable, his silk vest gleaming in the sun. He hadn't just walked by. He had stopped. He was listening. He held their gaze for 3 seconds, then smiled, that same cold, golden smile from the street. He had heard, he knew about the shipment. He knew she had hired the stranger. And he was pleased. He tipped his hat, a gesture of pure mockery, and moved on. The light flooded back into the room, but it felt colder than before. The air before dawn was sharp, a cold, thin blade smelling of pine and frost. Ash Hollow was not asleep. It was holding its breath. In the gray twilight, the only light came from a single lantern hanging inside the Hart freight post, throwing a wan, yellow square onto the dust. The wagon, a heavy-duty mud hauler, sat laden and low on its axles. The cargo was marked with simple black stenciling mining supplies, but Evelyn, Rowan, and Josie knew it held 20 crates of dynamite, a smaller, carefully padded box of blasting caps, and several spools of fuse. It was a volatile, essential, and, as of yesterday, extremely high-risk shipment. Evelyn cinched the final harness buckle on the lead mule, her breath plumed in the cold. She wore her father's heavy canvas duster, the collar turned up. The bruise on her cheek was a dark, stiff mask, pulsing with a dull, throbbing pain. Rowan Pike emerged from the livery shadows, not walking, but flowing. He led his own mount, a tough, intelligent buckskin, and moved with a quiet economy of motion. He had already checked the wagon's axles, the linchpins, and the heavy brake bar. He didn't offer words of encouragement. He just did the work. His rifle was already snug in the saddle scabbard, the worn Colt high on his hip. "He knows we're going," Evelyn stated, her voice flat, the words absorbed by the thick air. "He's counting on it," Rowan replied, swinging into his saddle. The leather creaked, a sound as loud as a gunshot in the stillness. "I'll ride flank, about 50 yards out, on the high side. Keep that team at a steady walk. Don't look for trouble, just watch the mule's ears. They'll tell you before you see it." He paused, looking down at her, a tall shadow against the pale, graying sky. "If you hear me shout, you don't stop to look. You don't wait. You drive. You drive them hard until the road opens up." "Understand." Evelyn nodded, her jaw tight. She climbed onto the driver's bench, the cold wood biting through her trousers. She gathered the thick leather reins, her knuckles white. Across the street, the Voss bank was dark and silent, a sleeping predator. "Let's go," she said. The wagon wheels groaned in protest, a long, drawn-out sound that seemed to tear the silence. They rolled, heavy and slow, out of Ash Hollow, heading north toward the high, broken country of the Boulder's Rise. For the first 3 hours, the only sound was the wind, a low, keening whistle through the sagebrush and the steady, rhythmic clink-creak jingle of the wagon and team. The land was wide and open, rolling hills of cured grass that gave them visibility. Rowan, true to his word, was a distant figure, sometimes disappearing into a dry wash or silhouetted on a ridge, his head constantly moving, reading the land. The road began to climb, narrowing as it entered the limestone cut of Crowfoot Pass. The walls rose 100 feet on either side, sheer and gray, blocking the sun. The air grew still, and the sounds of the wagon suddenly echoed back at them, sharp and confined. Evelyn felt the mule's ears twitch and pivot. They were nervous. "Get ready!" Rowan's voice called out. It was not a shout. It was a sharp, clear command that cut the air. Evelyn tensed, her eyes scanning the rimrock above. Her heart hammered against her ribs. The first shot was a high-pitched, angry whine. It kicked up a plume of white dust 6 feet in front of the lead mule's hooves. The animal screamed and tried to rear, the entire team jerking and pulling against the traces. A second shot, almost immediately. From the other side of the pass. This one was lower, harder. It struck the heavy oak side of the wagon bed with a solid, sickening thunk. It had missed the stenciled red warning dynamite by less than a foot. "Go!" Rowan roared. Evelyn didn't hesitate. She snapped the long leather reins, her voice a sharp crack she didn't recognize. "Hiya, get up, go!" The heavy wagon, powered by the terror of the 6-mule team, lurched into a desperate, lumbering run. The wagon bed slammed and crashed over the rocky road. 2 men appeared on the ridge, standing clear against the morning sky. They were not Voss's town loafers. These were hired guns, deliberate and unhurried. They levered their rifles, aiming carefully. Not at Evelyn. At the cargo. Rowan was already in motion. He spurred his buckskin, not away from the danger, but directly into it. He angled his horse, a suicidal maneuver, placing himself and his mount between the gunmen on the ridge and the bouncing wagon. He didn't aim to kill. He aimed to disrupt. He hauled his rifle from its scabbard and, in one motion, fired at the rock face just above the first gunman. The bullet ricocheted, a high-velocity zing that sent a spray of limestone chips and stinging white dust into the man's face. The gunman cried out, dropping his rifle to shield his eyes. The second man adjusted. Tracking the wagon, Rowan fired again. The bullet struck the wooden stock of the second man's rifle, the impact tearing the weapon from his grasp, sending it clattering down the rocks. It was a masterful, almost impossible shot. Evelyn kept her head down, her body hunched over, her arms burning from the strain. She used her own small frame to shield the carefully padded box of delicate blasting caps wedged by her feet. She focused on nothing but the path ahead, on the straining necks of her team, fighting to keep the heavy, bouncing wagon from careening into the canyon wall. A wheel hit a deep rut, sending a jolt through her spine that made her teeth click. "Clear, almost clear," Rowan yelled. His voice strained. A final, desperate pistol shot from the disarmed man kicked up sparks from the iron rim of the rear wagon wheel. Then they were through, bursting from the narrow, shadowy pass into the bright, open sunlight of the high plateau. Evelyn did not slow the team. She let them run, their panic spending itself over another half-mile of open road before she finally hauled back on the reins. Pulling the lathered, trembling animals to a halt, she was shaking so violently she could barely hold the leather straps. Rowan trotted up, his face grim, his rifle still in his hand. He scanned their back trail, his horse breathing hard but calm. "They're gone. They weren't paid enough to be persistent." He dismounted, walking to the side of the wagon, examining the deep bullet gouge in the wood. "They were aiming for the powder. An explosion in the pass. No shipment, no payment, no freight house." He met her eyes. "Voss would have called it a tragic accident." Evelyn slid off the bench, her knees buckling as she hit the ground. She leaned against the wheel, catching her breath. "They would have blown themselves up. And us." "That's the point," Rowan said. "No witnesses." He looked at her, his gaze taking in her white, strained face. "You held the team. You did well." He turned and, without another word, remounted, his gaze already sweeping the horizon. The compliment, sparse and dry as it was, felt like a steadying hand. She took a long, shaky drink from her canteen, straightened her shoulders, and climbed back onto the bench. They reached Boulder's Rise by late afternoon. The mine was a raw wound on the mountainside, a noisy, chaotic jumble of tents, raw plank shacks, and the constant, thundering stomp of the distant stamp mill. Men, caked in gray dust and sweat, stopped their work to watch the wagon arrive, their faces weary. The foreman, a broad, anxious man named Brody, signed for the dynamite, his relief visible. "Was worried you wouldn't make it, Miss Hart," he said, his eyes shifting nervously. "Heard rumors of trouble down in Ash Hollow." "We're here, Mr. Brody," Evelyn said crisply, swinging down from the bench. Her professionalism was a shield. "As per the contract, payment is due on delivery." Brody's face, already grim, soured completely. He shuffled his feet, twisting his hat in his hands. "Aye, well, about that, we can't issue the bank draft." Evelyn's heart, which had just started to slow, turned to ice. "What do you mean the terms are clear?" "It's the bank, Miss Voss's bank." He gestured, as if the bank were a looming presence even here. "They seized our payroll account this morning, froze every cent, claimed it was for an overdue note we didn't even know we had." This was it. Voss had flanked her. He had cut her off at both ends. The trap was complete. "But," Brody said, seeing the color drain from her face, "the men, we need that powder, or we're all out of work. We took up a collection." He turned and yelled, "Bring it." Two miners hauled a heavy canvas sack from the office shack, grunting with the effort. They dropped it onto the wagon's bench with a solid, metallic clank and jingle. "It's silver," Brody said, his voice miserable with apology. "Mostly coins, dollars, halves, quarters. It's the right amount. But it's heavy. It's all we have." It was a disaster. She couldn't deposit this. Voss owned the only bank. She would have to haul hundreds of pounds of silver coin back to Ash Hollow, a rolling target for every road agent in the territory. "I'll need a receipt for the cash payment," Evelyn said, her voice tight, forcing her mind to work. Of course. Brody rushed into his shack and returned, handing her a piece of paper. "Here you are, paid in full, silver coin, with my signature." Evelyn took the paper. She looked at the scrawled signature, T. Brody, Foreman, and she froze. The ink was not black. It was a stark, iridescent, bright blue, the exact same, unnatural color as the forged addendum in her bank ledger. She looked up, her face a careful, neutral mask. "This ink, Mr. Brody, it's unusual. Where did you get it?" Brody looked confused, squinting at the paper. The telegrapher down in Ash Hollow, Miss Green. She gets us our supplies from the railhead, does all our ordering. She ordered that ink for me last month." "Why?" Evelyn folded the paper slowly, deliberately, and tucked it into the deep pocket of her duster. "No reason. It's just a striking color." Across the wagon bed, Rowan, who had been quietly watching the unloading, met her eyes. He said nothing. He did not have to. He knew. The ride back was a long, tense nightmare. They pushed late into the night, the wagon now heavier with the dead weight of the silver. The moon was a thin, useless sliver, offering no light. Evelyn drove until her shoulders burned and her vision blurred. The jarring, desperate chase in the pass had aggravated her fall from the day before, and her shoulder throbbed with a deep, grinding pain. As they moved through a patch of thick woods, a low-hanging branch, unseen in the dark, snapped back. She flinched, but it lashed her right arm, tearing the sleeve of her duster and shirt, leaving a long, bleeding scratch from her wrist to her elbow. She cried out, a small, sharp sound, but did not stop the team. "Stop!" Rowan's voice came from the dark beside her. He had ridden in closer as the night deepened. "I'll take the team. I'm fine," she lied, her voice cracking with exhaustion. He dismounted and simply stood by the lead mule's head, a solid obstacle. "Stop! You're bleeding." She hauled back on the reins. the team stopping with a jingle of harness. The silence of the prairie rushed in, absolute and cold. She tried to unwrap the reins from her stinging hands, but her fingers were numb and clumsy. Rowan stepped up onto the wheel hub. He didn't ask permission. He gently, firmly, took the leather straps from her grip. His hands were rough as cured leather, but his touch was surprisingly careful. He was close, closer than he had been at any point. She could smell the trail dust on him, the scent of his horse, and the faint, clean aroma of the lye soap he must have used at the livery. "Your arm," he said. It was not a question. "It's just a scrape. It's bleeding through your clothes." He reached into his saddlebag, which he'd tied to the wagon rail, and pulled out a clean cotton handkerchief and his canteen. He soaked a corner of the cloth, the small sound of the water loud in the quiet. "Give me your arm." She hesitated, then extended her right arm, pulling back the torn sleeve. He held her wrist, his grip firm, anchoring her. He carefully, methodically, dabbed at the long scratch, cleaning away the blood and grime. His touch was impersonal, focused, like a doctor's. Yet it was the first gentle human contact she had felt in, she could not remember how long. She studied his profile in the faint starlight, the hard, clean line of his jaw, the shadow of his hat brim. He was focused entirely on the task, his breathing slow and steady. He finished cleaning the cut and then, using the dry part of the cloth, began to wrap it, starting at her wrist. His fingers brushed the sensitive skin of her inner arm. Evelyn drew a sharp, quiet breath. It was not from pain. He paused, his hand stilled on her arm. He looked up, his eyes meeting hers in the darkness. The small space between them became charged. The world shrank to the wagon bench, to the smell of dust and water, to the heat radiating from his body. It was a single, shared breath. She saw the question in his eyes, the same quiet acknowledgement he had shown her in the freight house, but it was deeper now. Warmed by the shared danger and the prairie night, he finished tying the knot, his movements quick and precise. "It'll hold." His voice was rougher now. He let go of her arm, but neither of them moved away. The silence hummed. "We should keep moving," she whispered, her voice unsteady. "I'll drive," he said. He didn't move back to his horse. He swung himself up onto the bench beside her, taking the reins. Evelyn pulled her duster tighter, moving to the far side of the bench, but the small space was suddenly, acutely, aware of his presence. They arrived in Ash Hollow well after midnight, two exhausted figures on a wagon of silver. They found Josie Milburn asleep in a chair by the office window, a double-barreled shotgun across her lap. She jerked awake as they entered. "Thank God," she breathed, seeing them. "The whole town. It's been awful. Voss has been at the saloon, buying drinks, telling everyone how he's expanding his investments. He's been bragging. He's been busy," Evelyn said, her voice hard with weariness. She locked the heavy safe on the last bag of silver. "Josie, I was right. The blue ink. It was at the mine." Josie's hand flew to her mouth. "Evelyn, while you were gone, Marta Green came by. She was a wreck, crying. She bought a one-way ticket on the afternoon stage to Cheyenne. She's running. She was terrified. I asked her what was wrong. She wouldn't say, but she said Voss. Voss was making her send messages, not regular telegraphs. She said they were coded. To a law firm in Denver. She said they were all signed BV. The three pieces snapped together. The forged blue ink in her ledger, the blue ink on the mine foreman's receipt, the coded messages from the telegraph office. "He's been sending his instructions by wire," Evelyn said, her mind racing, cutting through the fog of exhaustion. "Instructions to the mines bank in Denver to freeze their assets. Instructions for his clerk here to forge my ledger. It's a conspiracy." Rowan, who had been listening from the shadows near the door, spoke. "The telegraph office keeps a logbook. A carbon copy of every message sent." Evelyn and Josie both looked at him. "Marta's gone." Josie said, "The office is locked up tight. A lock isn't a wall." Rowan said, his meaning clear. Evelyn stiffened. No. Rowan looked at her, his expression unreadable. No. We're not breaking in. We are not stealing. She began to pace the small office, the motion easing the ache in her shoulder, fueling her anger. If I do that, I'm no better than he is. If I break the law to prove he broke the law, we both end up in a cell. Or, more likely, he just buys the judge. He thinks I'm just a shopkeeper. He expects me to fight him with panic, or with a gun. She stopped, looking first at Josie, then at Rowan. He's wrong. I'm going to fight him with his own contracts. We're not going to steal the logbook. We're going to find Marta. We will convince her to talk. We will do this clean. Rowan studied her for a long moment, the first trace of something like a smile touching the corner of his mouth. He gave a slow nod. Your fight, your rules. A sudden, hellish red glow filled the office window, painting their faces in a flickering, pulsing light. Josie gasped and ran to the door, pulling it open. The smell hit them first acrid smoke, and the sharp, unmistakable scent of kerosene. Down the street, toward the edge of town, the sky was boiling red and orange. A column of fire and black smoke climbed into the night. It's the Davidsons' place, Josie whispered, her hand to her mouth. The farm, the family Voss forced out. They ran onto the boardwalk. Other people were emerging from their homes, shadows against the inferno. The Davidsons' barn was fully engulfed, a roaring tower of flame. Then, the frantic, high-pitched ringing of the town bell started, organizing the bucket brigade, his voice booming with authority and civic concern, was Barclay Voss. Sheriff Keeler was already there, his hat on, scribbling in a notepad by the light of the flames. Evelyn and Rowan walked closer, close enough to hear Keeler talking to the saloon owner. Tragic, Keeler said, shaking his head with practiced sadness. Looks like a spark from their cook stove must have caught the kindling. An accidental coal fire, plain and simple. Evelyn looked at the ground, just at the edge of the light, near the barn's foundation. A 5-gallon kerosene can, its side scorched, lay gleaming in the weeds. Keeler had seen it. He had deliberately stepped over it to make his pronouncement. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't even about the Davidsons, who were already gone. This was a message. It was a sermon, preached in fire, for the entire town to see. This is what happens to those who are forced out. This is what happens to those who stand in the way. Ash Hollow was no longer just a town in trouble. It was a tinderbox. And tonight, it smelled overwhelmingly of fear. The fire at the Davidson farm was a funeral pyre for the town's innocence. It burned all night, a hellish, smoky beacon that proclaimed the end of negotiation. Barclay Voss had stopped asking. He was now, simply, taking. The smell of kerosene and charred pine lingered in the cold morning air, a sickness in the back of the throat. Ash Hollow was silent, its citizens walking quickly, their eyes on the ground. Evelyn, Rowan, and Josie stood in the back room of the freight house, the silver from the mine piled in heavy, inert sacks by the safe. The adrenaline from the ride, the fight, and the fire had evaporated, leaving behind a cold, gritty residue of exhaustion and fear. "He'll kill us," Josie whispered, her voice cracking. "He'll burn this place down with us in it, and Keeler will write faulty chimney in his report." "He won't have to," Evelyn said, her voice hollow. She touched the blue ink receipt from the mine, lying on her desk. "He's already won. He has the law. He has the money. All we have is this." She gestured to the heavy, silent bags of coin. "We have the ink," Rowan said, his voice cutting through the despair. "And we have Marta Green. Marta's gone," Josie said. "The stage. It leaves in an hour. Then we have an hour." Rowan was already moving, checking the loads in his Colt, spinning the cylinder with a quiet, oily click. "Rowan, no," Evelyn said, moving to stop him. "We can't force her." "I'm not forcing her," he said, not looking up. "I'm offering her a choice other than running. Running just means you die tired." He holstered the pistol. "You should come. She trusts you. She's afraid of me." They found Marta Green not at the stagecoach stop, but in her small rented room above the bakery, frantically stuffing clothes into a carpet bag. She was a thin, bird-like woman, her eyes red and swollen. When she saw them, she let out a small, terrified squeak and dropped a petticoat. "Please," she stammered, backing against the wall. "I don't know anything. I need to visit my sister in Cheyenne. I'm sick." "The Davidsons' barn burned down last night." "Marta," Evelyn said, her voice gentle but firm, blocking the doorway. "I heard," Marta whispered, her eyes darting to the window. "A terrible accident." "It was kerosene, and it was a message," Evelyn said, stepping into the room. "The same message he's been sending through your telegraph wire for months." Marta crumpled onto the bed. "I couldn't say no. He came in one day, said the bank was investing in the telegraph line, that my reports, my logs, had to be co-signed by his clerk. And then the messages started. To Denver. To the bank in Cheyenne." "What messages?" Rowan asked, his voice low from the hallway, careful not to crowd her. Marta was crying now, rocking back and forth. "Coded, just phrases. Advise client to adjust terms on Asset 401. Recommend immediate repricing of water access, Sector B." I didn't know what it meant. Not at first. But then the notes started getting called. Then the ranchers couldn't draw from the Denver banks. Repricing of water access. Her voice broke. It wasn't a price. It was a denial. He was choking them. He was using me to do it. "And the blue ink," Evelyn said, holding out the miner's receipt. Marta nodded, miserable. He supplied it, said it was for bank use only. A special order, to make his addendums official. He said it was legal. He said it was just business. "Did you keep the logs?" Rowan asked. Marta's hand went to the carpet bag. She hesitated, then pulled out the thick, bound telegraph logbook. "We have to keep copies. It's regulations. I was going to burn it, but I couldn't. I was afraid to." "You did the right thing," Evelyn said, taking the book. It was heavy. It was proof. "He'll kill me," Marta whispered. "He will," Evelyn agreed, her voice hard as iron. "He'll kill you for what you know, whether you run or not. Or you can stand with me, and we can use this to kill him first, legally." Back in the freight house, the door locked, the curtains drawn. The three of them looked at the evidence, Evelyn's forged ledger, the blue ink receipts, and now, the official telegraph logbook. It was a perfect, damning paper trail. "It's enough," Evelyn said, a wild, sharp hope in her voice. "This is a conspiracy. It's fraud. It's a federal crime, interfering with the telegraph. Isn't it?" "It is," Rowan said. "But it's useless here. Keeler would burn the book and arrest Marta for stealing it. The local judge is on Voss's payroll. You can't fight a king in his own castle." "So what do we do?" Josie asked, her hope deflating. "Take it to the governor in Cheyenne." "He's a railroad man," Rowan said, dismissing the idea. He was turning a page in the log, his finger tracing the coded messages. He was silent for a long time. He began, then stopped. He looked at Evelyn, then at Josie, as if weighing the cost of the words. "Before this, I was a scout for the cavalry. Up north. We weren't just chasing Indians. We were mapping, enforcing federal treaties. Sometimes we'd ride with the marshals, the real ones, the federal ones." He finally looked up, his eyes meeting Evelyn's. "There's a man, Marshal Luther Gaines. He's based in Silver Cliff. He's hard, but he's straight. He doesn't like cattle barons, he doesn't like bankers, and he doesn't like men who buy the law. If we can get this dossier to him, he'll see it for what it is. He has the authority to bypass Keeler. He can bring federal troops if he has to." Silver Cliff. The name hung in the air. It was a mining town, 100 miles over the mountains, across the treacherous, wind-blasted expanse of Raven's Pass. A 3, maybe 4-day ride. If they lived, Evelyn's mind, a freight master's mind, began to click, calculating routes, risks, and possibilities. A federal warrant. She breathed. He could get a federal warrant. He could freeze Voss's assets. The idea was staggering. It was the only move left on the board. The decision was made, but Voss was not idle. The next day, the harassment began. It wasn't overt. It was a slow, creeping rot. Cale and 2 other men from the saloon, the same ones who had stood with Voss during the fire, didn't try to break in. They set up camp on the boardwalk across the street. They whittled. They spat tobacco. They watched when Mrs. Hemlock tried to enter to post a letter. Cale, accidentally, stretched his legs. Tripping her, she scattered her mail in the dust, burst into tears, and ran. When a young ranch hand came to pick up a parcel, the men surrounded him, asking him friendly questions about his boss's water supply, until the boy turned pale and rode off, leaving the parcel behind. The Hart freight post was under siege. Rowan watched from the window for 10 minutes, his face expressionless. Then, he handed Josie the heavy, double-barreled shotgun. "Evelyn, stay inside. Lock the door behind me," he said. He walked outside, into the white sunlight. He didn't have his rifle. He just walked onto the porch, his hands empty, and stood there. Cale, emboldened, grinned. Lost, Pike, or just enjoying the view. Rowan didn't answer. He walked down the steps and started across the street. He moved with a slow, deliberate, almost lazy pace. The men, seeing him coming, stood up. They dropped their whittling sticks. Their hands moved toward their belts. Rowan stopped 10 feet from them. "Last time you fell in the trough, Cale," he said, his voice quiet, conversational. "It was water. This time, it's the undertaker's window. It'll be glass and wood." He looked at the other 2 men. "He's not paying you enough." The men looked at Cale. Cale looked at Rowan. He saw the absolute stillness in the man, the complete absence of fear, or anger, or anything but certainty. Cale was a bully, and a bully's only currency is fear. He had none to spend here. He spat, a thick stream of brown juice that landed just short of Rowan's boot. "We're just taking the air. Take it somewhere else," Rowan said. Cale held his gaze for another 5 seconds, but the bravado was gone. He was the one who looked away first. "Come on, boys. Air's better at the saloon." They shuffled off, trying to maintain some dignity. Rowan watched them go, then turned and walked back. Inside, Josie was shaking, the shotgun heavy in her hands. "That won't be the last time," Rowan said, locking the door. He took the shotgun from her. "You need to know how this works." For the next hour, he was no longer a drifter. He was a scout. He was a soldier. "This is not for scaring," he told her, his voice clipped and professional. He broke the gun open, showing her the firing pins. "This is for stopping. This is what you do." He had her break it. "Load 2 brass shells. Snap it shut. The kick will break your shoulder if you hold it loose. You hold it tight. Here." He pressed the stock against her shoulder. "Lean into it. Don't aim for the head. You'll miss. Don't aim for the chest. You might miss. You aim for the belt buckle, the center. You can't miss. You pull both triggers. Not one, both." He made her do it. Load, aim, unload. Load, aim, unload. Again and again, until the fumbling, terrified girl was replaced by a woman whose hands were steady, her face pale but set. "You are the guard," he told her. "You protect the evidence. You protect Marta." The next knock came an hour later. It was polite. It was Sheriff Keeler. Evelyn, her heart pounding, opened the door. He was alone, his hat in his hand, his face arranged in lines of fatherly concern. "Miss Hart, a moment I was hoping you might join me for a cup of tea at the hotel. In public, there are concerns." It was a summons. A polite, civilized, public threat. She walked with him, her back straight. The entire town watching, in the hotel dining room. The tea service between them. Keeler leaned in. "Evelyn, I've known you since you were a child. Your father was a good man, a practical man. He knew how this town worked. He knew how contracts worked. Sheriff, Evelyn replied, her cup untouched. Keeler sighed, a theatrical sound of disappointment. Barclay Voss is a partner in this town's prosperity. He is the engine of progress. And you are throwing sand in the gears. I am here, as a friend, to advise you to stop. You are playing with fire, young lady. Evelyn looked at him, her gaze so steady, so cold, it made him falter. I sell kerosene every day. Sheriff, I know exactly how fire works. I know what it eats. And I know how to handle it. Thank you for the tea. She stood up, dropped a nickel on the table, and walked out, leaving him staring, his polite mask of concern having finally, utterly, slipped. That night, they finalized the plan. The clock was ticking. He's called the note, Evelyn said, staring at the calendar on her office wall. The end of the month. That's 18 days. We don't have 18 days, Rowan said. He was cleaning his rifle, the pieces laid out on an oilcloth. After today, he knows the soft approach failed. He'll hit you. He'll hit the wagon. He'll try to take that silver. He'll assume that's all you have. Which is why you and I leave tomorrow. Evelyn said, before dawn. Josie, who had been listening, stepped forward. I'll stay. I'll run the post. Keep the lights on. If Cale and his men come back, they'll just see me. They'll think you're in the back, counting your silver. Afraid. They won't know you're gone for at least a day, maybe 2. It's too dangerous, Evelyn said. It's more dangerous if we all go, or if we all stay, Josie said, her hand resting on the stock of the shotgun, which now leaned against the counter. I can do this. Marta, who had been hiding in the back room, came out, holding a stack of thin, onion skin papers and several sheets of black carbon. I can't go. They know my face at every telegraph station between here and Cheyenne. But I've copied them. I've copied every single coded telegram, the originals from the logbook, and these. We split the evidence, Rowan said, his mind working. Evelyn and I take the originals. The copies stay here. But where? Josie asked. He'll tear this place apart if he finds out. Evelyn walked to the corner of the office, to a small, delicate rosewood desk that was out of place among the heavy oak ledgers and mailbags. It had been her mother's. On it sat a single, faded tintype of a woman with Evelyn's eyes. She pulled open the bottom drawer. It was filled with dried flowers, a child's drawing, and a bundle of letters tied with a silk ribbon. Evelyn pressed a finger against the back panel of the drawer. A click, and a false bottom sprang open, revealing a shallow, hidden compartment, barely a quarter-inch deep. My mother's, Evelyn said, her voice thick. She kept her wedding letters from my father here. Marta looked at Evelyn, then at the hiding place. She nodded. With reverent hands, she slid the carbon copies of Voss's conspiracy, the paper that could save their town, into the secret space, hiding them among the scent of dried lavender and old love. He will never look there, Josie whispered. Good, Rowan said, sliding the rifle's bolt back into place with a sharp, metallic shing. He stood, the weapon reassembled. Josie, you have 2 jobs. Keep the door locked and keep that shotgun loaded. He turned to Evelyn. Travel light, 1 canteen, no extra gear. Raven's Pass is unforgiving, and we'll be moving fast. Evelyn was already tying her hair back, pulling on her father's canvas duster. Her eyes met his, bright and hard in the lamplight. So am I. The wind in Raven's Pass did not just blow, it attacked. They had been climbing for 6 hours, pushing their horses hard, when the world changed. The sky, a hard, brittle blue, had turned the color of a fresh bruise, a deep, sickly purple gray. The air, which had been thin and cold, became heavy, static, and utterly still. Rowan, riding 20 yards ahead, pulled his buckskin to a halt. The animal danced nervously, its ears pinned back. Sleet! He shouted back at her, his voice snatched by the sudden, rising shriek of the wind. We're caught! We need cover! Now! Evelyn's horse, a sturdy mare, whinnied, its eyes wide. The first blast hit them not as rain, but as a horizontal spray of ice pellets that stung her exposed skin like buckshot. Within a minute, the world was gone, replaced by a roaring, chaotic whiteout. The temperature plummeted. There! Rowan was off his horse, dragging it by the bridle, pointing to a dark shape against the granite cliff face. "It's a hut, get to it." It was a shepherd's line shack, long abandoned, little more than a low-slung hovel of stone and sod, built into a cleft in the rock. They stumbled inside, dragging the terrified horses into the small, attached lean-to, then crashing through the main door of the hut itself. Rowan slammed the warped wooden plank shut, dropping the heavy bar. The sound of the storm instantly changed from a violent, tearing scream to a muffled, drumming roar. The tiny, windowless room was plunged into near darkness. Evelyn leaned against the wall, gasping, her entire body shaking violently. Her canvas duster was a sheet of ice, her hair frozen to her neck. The cold was a physical, crushing weight. "The papers," she chattered, her fingers numb. Fumbling inside her blouse, she pulled out the oilcloth packet. It was, miraculously, still dry, protected by her body heat. "Good!" Rowan's voice came from the dark. He was moving, his saddlebag thudding to the dirt floor. A second later, a flint struck steel. A spark, then another. A tiny ember flared in a bundle of tinder, and he blew on it, his face illuminated in a sudden, brief orange glow. A small, weak flame caught on the dry grass and twigs he'd gathered from a forgotten pile in the corner. He looked at her. In the growing, flickering light, he could see the reality of their situation. She was soaked to the skin. Her lips were blue. The violent shaking was not just from fear. It was the first stage of lethal cold. "You have to get out of those wet clothes. Evelyn," he said, his voice flat, practical. She stared at him, unable to process the words. The hut was perhaps 10 feet square. There was no privacy. There was only the storm. And him. "You'll be dead by midnight if you don't," he said, his voice urgent. He turned to his own saddlebag and pulled out a heavy, dark wool sweater. It was his only dry garment. He held it out to her. "Put this on." She looked at the sweater, then at him, her body paralyzed by cold and propriety. Rowan understood. He didn't sigh. He didn't argue. He simply turned his back, a solid wall of shadow, and stared at the rough, rattling door. "I'm checking the bar. I won't look. Just be quick." It was the most profound courtesy he could have offered, his deliberate, respectful blindness. Evelyn's fingers were wooden, clumsy. She fumbled with the buttons of the icy duster, letting it fall to the floor. Her wet blouse and camisole felt like a skin of ice. With a desperate, shuddering gasp, she stripped them off, the cold air hitting her torso like a slap. She pulled the heavy wool sweater over her head. It was impossibly warm. It was huge, falling to her mid-thighs, the sleeves covering her hands entirely. It smelled of wool, trail dust, and faintly of him. The shivering began to ease almost immediately, replaced by a painful, tingling prickle as her blood began to move again. It's on," she whispered, her voice trembling. He turned back. His gaze was polite, landing on her face, then moving to the fire, which he began to feed with larger pieces of wood. He sat back on his heels, pushing his hat back. Evelyn huddled opposite him, drawing her knees up under the massive sweater, trying to rub life back into her legs. The fire snapped, a bright, cheerful sound against the low howl of the wind. He reached for another piece of wood, and his hand entered the circle of bright light. Evelyn knelt, reaching to help him, to stabilize the small, growing pyramid of fuel. Their fingers brushed. His skin was rough, warm. Her own was like ice, but it wasn't the contact that made her pause. It was what she saw. In the sharp, dancing light of the fire, she saw his wrists, encircling both of them, stark white against his tanned skin, were faint, thin scars. They were pale and old, but unmistakable. Not the jagged mark of a knife or a burn, but the symmetrical, chafed lines of bindings, ropes, Or shackles. She looked from his wrists to his face. Rowan didn't pull his hand away. He let the silence stretch, watching her, knowing what she had seen. He turned his gaze to the fire, his profile hard, etched by the flames. "Down in Texas," he said, his voice quiet, resonating in the small hut. "Another lifetime, another land baron. He wasn't like Voss. He didn't use contracts." He fed another stick into the fire, watching it catch. He used barbed wire, fenced the open range, claimed the water. The little ranchers. We formed an association, tried to fight him in court. "What happened?" Evelyn whispered, her voice barely audible over the storm. The judge was his cousin. The sheriff was his employee. The trial was a joke. So we cut his fences. We did it at night. We were just trying to get our cattle to water." He was silent for a long moment. The only sound, the hiss of sleet against the stone walls. He had men riding his fences. They weren't ranchers. They were gunmen. They caught us. My brother-in-law. He was shot. They tied me. He glanced at his wrists. A fleeting, dark memory. They held me for a week in a line shack, just like this one. No food, no light. Then they marched me to the U.S. Marshal in Amarillo. Claimed I had shot my brother-in-law. Claimed it was a dispute over cattle. Evelyn's hand rose to cover her mouth. "It was my word against 6 of his men, my own wife." She was so terrified. She testified that she didn't know what happened, that she'd just heard shots. He shook his head. The memory old, but not dead. The justice was fast. They sent me to a territorial prison. I got out, but by then the land baron had won. He'd sold the whole county to a syndicate from Chicago and was living in a hotel in St. Louis. He was a rich man. He looked up, his eyes meeting hers, the fire reflected in their depths. "I learned something. You can't fight a man like that by breaking his rules. He just buys new ones. You can't fight him with a gun. He just hires more. I left. I couldn't stand the smell of the ink they used to sign those lies." He had bared his soul, the raw, ugly truth of his past. The hut was filled with his confession, and the noise of the storm seemed to fade. Evelyn found herself reaching, not for him, but for her own truth. "My father," she said, her voice soft. "He was the opposite. He believed in the ink. He believed a man's word, written on paper, was a sacred thing. He built the freight house on that idea." She pulled her knees closer, the warmth of the wool a comfort. "My mother. She was the one who taught me to read the fine print. She taught me arithmetic. She would sit with me late at night and have me audit the ledgers. 'They will expect you to be a woman,' she'd say. 'They will expect you to be weak at numbers. Never let them be right.'" A violent crack of thunder, so close it shook the ground, made them both jump. The hut vibrated, dust sifting from the sod roof. Evelyn let out a small, startled cry and instinctively shuffled closer to the fire, closer to him. The small distance between them was gone. They were 2 people huddled by a small flame, a universe of ice and violence raging just outside the thin plank door. His knee was inches from hers. She could feel the heat radiating from his body. "Before she died," Evelyn continued, her voice quieter now. "She knew Voss was circling. She knew my father was too trusting. She held my hand." Evelyn looked at her own hand, now chafed and red from the rains. She told me, "Evelyn, this world is full of men who will tell you what you are. They will try to tell you what you are worth. Don't you ever." She squeezed my hand so tight. "Don't you ever let anyone else set the price on your dreams." She looked at Rowan. "He thinks he can buy my dream for the price of a called note. He's wrong." Rowan looked at her, and for the first time, she saw the weariness, the cynicism, the hard shield he wore, just dissolve. He wasn't seeing a client. He wasn't seeing a woman who needed saving. He was seeing a fellow soldier. He saw the same steel in her that had been beaten out of him. The air in the hut changed. It was no longer cold. The small space was charged, alive. The only sounds were the fire in their breathing. He looked at her, his gaze traveling from her eyes, still bright with unshed tears and defiance, to her mouth. He didn't move. He wouldn't. He had given his word by turning his back. He lifted his hand, the one with the scarred wrist, and very, very slowly, as if not to frighten a wild thing, he brushed his knuckles against her cheek, the one Voss had not struck. His touch was rough, calloused, and unbelievably gentle. "Is this?" he asked, his voice a low, gravelly whisper that was almost lost in the wind. "All right." Her heart was a painful, sudden hammer in her chest. She couldn't find her voice. She could only give a small, jerky nod. He didn't move. He left the choice, the power, entirely with her. Evelyn leaned forward. She closed the last few inches. She pressed her lips to his. It was a kiss of profound uncertainty. Tentative, chapped lips meeting chapped lips. It was just a touch. But then she felt him let out a long, shaky breath, a sound that was half surrender. His hand, the one at her cheek, slid into her damp hair, his fingers gently cradling her head. His other hand came to rest on her shoulder, not pulling, just holding, grounding her. She kissed him again, and this time it was not tentative. It was a claiming. It was the release of all the fear, all the loneliness, all the desperate, cold fight of the last few days. He responded, his mouth softening, opening to hers. The kiss deepened, becoming a slow, warm exploration. It was a kiss of shared pain, of recognizing the scars, seen and unseen. Evelyn felt a dizzying, liquid warmth spread from her chest to her limbs. It was more potent than the fire, more enveloping than the wool sweater. She brought her hand up, sliding it inside his open jacket, pressing it flat against his chest. She felt his heart. It was pounding, a hard, strong, vital beat. It was the most real thing she had ever felt. His arm tightened around her, pulling her from her side of the fire, drawing her closer until she was tucked against his side. His embrace was solid, absolute. It was not the desperate grab of a lonely man. It was the steady, firm hold of a man who was protecting something. They broke apart, breathless, but he did not let her go. He rested his forehead against hers. She kept her hand over his heart, her eyes closed. They just breathed, in and out. In time, the roar of the storm, the threat of Voss, the long, dangerous ride tomorrow, it all fell away, leaving only the sound of the fire and the steady, solid beat under her palm. He smiled, a small, weary smile against her hair. "Tomorrow," he whispered, his voice thick. "Tomorrow is going to be hard." "I know," she whispered back. "But not tonight." He kissed her forehead, a simple, chaste press of his lips. "Tonight you're safe. I promise." The fire burned low, casting glowing shadows. The storm outside began to quiet, its fury spent, replaced by a softer, muffling fall of snow. They sat, unmoving. For a long time, the exhaustion, held at bay by adrenaline and fear, returned. But this time it was a heavy, gentle blanket. Finally, he stirred. "You need to sleep." He shifted, arranging his bedroll, their only bedding, near the warm stones of the fire pit. He laid it out. "Take it. There's only one," she said, her voice practical, though her heart was still racing. "We share it, or we both freeze." He nodded, understanding. He lay down on the hard-packed earth, and she lay beside him, her back to him, both of them fully clothed, she in his sweater, he in his damp shirt. It was a practical, necessary arrangement. But as she settled, she felt his arm come around her, pulling her back against his chest. It was a solid, non-negotiable warmth. And then, in the darkness, his hand found hers, his fingers interlaced with hers, a strong, secure grip. The fire faded to embers. The world went silent, wrapped in snow and darkness. And for the first time in a year, Evelyn Hart did not dream of ledgers or enemies. She slept, anchored and warm, holding the hand of the only man in Wyoming who understood the price. The world, reborn in snow, was blindingly white. The storm had passed in the deep of the night, leaving a silence so profound it felt like a weight. They left the line shack at the first hint of gray light, their breath pluming in the frigid air. The high peaks of Raven's Pass were pristine, but as they descended, the snow thinned, turning to a treacherous, slick slush on the trail, which in turn became a thick, red mud that pulled at the horses' hooves. The warmth they had shared in the hut, the fragile, unspoken bond forged in the dark, had been packed away with the bedroll. The morning was for survival. Rowan rode point, his eyes constantly scanning the ridgelines, his gaze sharp and unforgiving. The graze on Evelyn's arm, now bound by his handkerchief, was a dull, stiff ache. The bruise on her cheek was a map of purple and yellow. But she rode tall. She was no longer just a postmistress. She was a woman carrying a federal case in her saddlebag. By mid-morning, they entered the mouth of Switchback Narrows. It was a geological trap. The trail, barely wide enough for a single wagon, snaked back and forth down the mountainside, hugging a sheer cliff face. On their right, a drop of 500 feet to a rocky, dry riverbed. On their left, a granite wall that rose straight up. The sun, climbing high, cast deep, black shadows that concealed gullies and outcrops, while turning the exposed rock into a blinding glare. Rowan reined in his buckskin, holding up a hand. The horses, sensing his tension, danced nervously on the slick mud. "What?" Evelyn whispered, pulling her mare up beside him. "This is where they do it," he said, his voice low, not moving his head. His eyes swept the rimrock above. "There, and there." He gave a subtle nod. "Too many shadows, too much echo. A man could shoot all day and you'd never find him." He dismounted, pulling his rifle from the scabbard. "We lead the horses. Stay tight to the wall. Do not look up. Just walk." He took the reins of his own horse, and Evelyn did the same. The only sounds were the shush-suck of their boots in the mud and the jingle of the harness. The air was still, too still. A pebble, dislodged from high above, rattled down the cliff face, striking the trail 10 feet in front of them. Rowan did not hesitate. "Back!" he yelled, shoving Evelyn and her mare against the rock wall. The world exploded. A single shot, a flat, hard crack, echoed and re-echoed, amplified by the stone until it sounded like a volley from a dozen rifles. A spray of pulverized granite exploded from the wall, 2 feet from Evelyn's head, stinging her face with sharp, hot dust. Above. Rowan shouted, already moving, pulling his horse into a cleft in the rock. "And behind us!" A second shot, this one from down the trail, whined past them, striking Rowan's horse in the rump. The animal screamed, a high, terrifying sound, and reared, jerking the reins from Rowan's hand. "They've got us pinned!" Evelyn cried, her voice thin with panic, her own mare trying to bolt. 3 men, high on the ridge in front of them. 2 more, on a switchback down below, cutting off their retreat. They were caught. 5 gunmen, and the men from the wagon. Voss hadn't sent a warning. He had sent an execution squad. "Evelyn!" Rowan's voice was a steel bar in the chaos. He had his rifle up, firing a single, pinning shot at the ridge. "Listen to me, your saddlebag. The small one. Do you have your mirror?" My mirror. She thought he was insane. "Do you have it?" he roared, as another bullet chipped the rock near his head. "Yes, yes." She fumbled at her bag, her fingers numb. "The ledge." He pointed to a narrow, crumbling shelf of rock about 20 feet ahead, barely a foot wide. "Get to it. Crawl. Stay low. Use the mirror to flash the sun at the men below us, the ones on the switchback. Keep them blind. Keep them looking at you. Can you do it?" She looked at the ledge. It was suicide. She looked at him. He was reloading, his face a mask of absolute, lethal focus. He was trusting her. He was giving her a job. "Yes," she said. "Go, I'll cover you." He stepped out from the cleft, a clear target, and fired twice, fast, at the ridge above. Crack, crack. The shot sent the gunman ducking. In that moment, Evelyn ran. She crouched low, her boots slipping, her heart in her throat. She reached the ledge and flattened herself against the cold, hard granite. She was exposed, a target on a tiny, crumbling shelf. Below her, the canyon yawned. She pulled the small, silver-backed mirror from her bag. Her hands were shaking so violently she almost dropped it. "Steady," Rowan yelled. "Now find the sun, flash them." She angled the mirror. A bright, perfect circle of reflected sun leaped from her hand. She aimed it down the trail. She found them. 2 men, squinting, raising their hands to shield their eyes. "That's it," Rowan shouted. "Hold it on them." The gunmen below, blinded and confused by the flashing, fired wildly. Their bullets went wide, clanging off the rock 10, 20 feet from her position. The 3 men above, seeing her move, concentrated their fire. Bullets rained down, pinning Rowan in his small cover, but they couldn't get an angle on Evelyn, who was tucked under the overhang of the ledge. Rowan leaned out, took careful aim, and fired. One of the gunmen on the ridge grunted and disappeared. "He's getting a new angle," Rowan yelled. "Stay down. I've got the ones below," Evelyn shouted back, her voice high but steady. A new man, one she hadn't seen, stepped out onto a rock high above her. He wasn't aiming a rifle. He held a rock the size of a man's head. He hefted it, and with a grunt, threw it. It wasn't aimed at her. It was aimed at her horse. The boulder struck the trail with a heavy, wet thud, exploding into smaller pieces, right at the mare's hooves. The horse, already terrified, screamed and reared. This was the moment Evelyn's world stopped. The mare, fighting the reins Evelyn had tied to a shrub, backed up, her iron-shod hooves slipping on the muddy, precarious edge of the canyon. With a shriek, the horse's hind legs went over the side. The animal scrambled, its front hooves clawing at the crumbling mud, its eyes white with terror. The saddlebag, the one holding the ledger, the logbook, the receipts, the proof was sliding, pulling the horse and their entire case into the 500-foot drop. "No!" Evelyn screamed. She scrambled off the ledge, forgetting the gunman, forgetting everything. "Evelyn, stay back!" Rowan yelled. She ignored him. She had a pistol, a small .32 caliber her father had kept, tucked in her belt. She drew it with her right hand, firing a single, panicked shot toward the ridge. Then she transferred the small pistol to her left hand. With her right, she lunged, grabbing the saddle horn of the terrified, dangling horse, just as the last of the trail gave way. Her weight, thrown forward, was just enough. The mare, feeling the new anchor, found a fresh purchase with one hoof. Evelyn dug her own heels in, her arm burning, screaming with the strain. She held the horse, the saddlebag, and the future of Ash Hollow were hanging from her one arm. A bullet slammed into the ground where she had been standing seconds before. Rowan saw it all. He stepped out from his cover, his rifle a part of him. He wasn't aiming to disrupt. He was aiming to stop. Crack! The man who had thrown the rock spun, dropping his rifle. Crack! A second man on the ridge cried out and grabbed his arm. "Hold on! Evelyn!" Rowan was running, his rifle in one hand, his lariat in the other. He reached the struggling horse, grabbed its bridle, and with a strength Evelyn didn't know he possessed, he hauled. He put his shoulder against the mare's chest, yelling, "Get up! Get up! Damn you!" The horse, sensing the new strength, lunged, scrambling, its hooves finding purchase. It collapsed onto the trail, panting and trembling. Safe, Evelyn fell backward, her arm numb, the pistol still clutched in her left hand, the mirror still in her pocket. Rowan was already turning, his rifle up, scanning the ridge. He was breathing hard. He looked at Evelyn, a look of pure, unadulterated fury and relief. "Are you—" The shot came from below. The men she'd been blinding. They had their angle now. The bullet, fired from a distance, was losing its power, but it was on target. It tore through the thick muscle of Rowan's left bicep. It was not a graze. It spun him around. He grunted, a deep, pained sound, and dropped his rifle. He stumbled, catching himself against the rock wall, his face pale, his teeth gritted. "Rowan, I'm all right," he hissed. the words tight with pain. He looked at his arm. Blood, dark and pulsing, was already staining his shirt, dripping onto the red mud. It's enough. It'll be enough to remember it. The fight was over. Or so the gunman thought. The man on the ridge who had dropped his rifle, the one Rowan had hit first, stood up, thinking Rowan was out of the fight. "Got him! Boys!" he yelled. "Let's finish this, Evelyn." Still on the ground, her hand no longer shaking, raised the small pistol. She looked at the man, a clear target against the sky. She aimed, not at his chest, not at his head. She fired. The small pop of the .32 was almost comical after the rifle blasts. But the bullet, true to her aim, struck the man's wide-brimmed hat, snatching it from his head and sending it sailing into the canyon. The man froze, his hand flying to his head, his face a picture of sudden, cold shock. He stared down at her. "The next one won't be high," Evelyn said, her voice shaking, but hard. Rowan, leaning against the wall, his right hand now holding his Colt, grinned through the pain. "That's it, Evelyn." He raised his voice, and the canyon walls took his words, magnifying them. "You lost, boys!" he bellowed, aiming his Colt at the ridge. He fired, and the crack, crack, crack of the echo sounded like a new wave of attackers. "There's 5 of us! You're surrounded!" He moved, stumbling 10 feet down the trail, and fired again. Crack, crack, crack. The sound came from a new place. The gunman, already spooked, fell for it. They fired a volley at the first echo. "Bang, bang! He's over there!" one of them yelled. Rowan fired from his new position. The gunman fired back. "They're wasting it," Rowan panted, the blood running down his fingers. He looked at Evelyn. "Wait for it." They fired again, and again, and then... silence. The panicked, furious clicking of a hammer on an empty chamber. "They're dry," Rowan yelled. "Drop your weapons, or we'll come up and collect you." One of the men from the ridge, the one who had grabbed his arm, stood up, his rifle held high. He threw it down. "Don't shoot, we quit, we quit." The man whose hat she'd shot off threw his down as well. "And the 2 below," Rowan shouted. "We're coming up," a voice echoed from the switchback. "Hands high." One man, the other had fled. The remaining 2 gunmen from the ridge and the one from below met on the trail, their hands in the air, their faces a mixture of fear and disbelief. They saw Evelyn, one woman, now reloading her small pistol, and Rowan, one man, bleeding heavily, holding his Colt steady in his right hand. There's only 2 of you," one of them stammered. "There were enough," Rowan said. He jerked his head at Evelyn. "The rope from my saddle, tie them tight." She did. She tied their hands, checking the knots as Rowan had taught her. They were rough men, smelling of sweat and cheap whiskey, and they looked at her with hatred, but they were defeated. She went to Rowan. "Your arm, my God." Later, he gritted, his face beaded with sweat. "We have to move." "You can't ride," she said, trying to tear a piece of her skirt for a bandage. "I have to." He looked at the 3 prisoners, now sitting, bound, in the mud. "Voss made a mistake. He didn't just send gunmen. He sent witnesses." He nodded to the prisoners. "Get them on their feet. They're walking." They pressed on. It was a brutal, grueling afternoon. Evelyn led her own mare, her arm aching, her body bruised. Rowan rode, slumped in his saddle, his left arm bound tightly to his chest, his face a pale, waxy gray. Behind them, tied together by the lariat, stumbled their 3 prisoners, cursing, but moving. Late in the day, as the sun began to dip, they crested the final ridge. The high, thin air was cold, but below them, in the next valley, a plume of wood smoke and mine-tailing dust rose against the purple sky. Silver Cliff. Evelyn looked at Rowan. He was barely conscious, but he was upright. He met her gaze, his eyes dark with pain but alive with a grim, hard-won victory. They started down the last slope, a woman, a wounded man, and 3 living, breathing pieces of evidence, all of them caked in sweat, gunpowder, and the red dust of Wyoming. Silver Cliff was not a town. It was a wound in the earth, a chaotic sprawl of mine tailings, saloons, and assay offices, all clinging to a mountainside that looked perpetually ready to shrug them into the valley below. The U.S. Marshall's office was a single-room brick building, identifiable only by the American flag hanging limply from a pole out front, its stripes stained with soot. Evelyn half carried, half dragged Rowan through the door. He was a dead weight, barely conscious, his face the color of wet ash. The three bound prisoners, prodded by Evelyn's small pistol, stumbled in after them, collapsing onto the floor in a heap of mud, fear and exhaustion. The man behind the desk did not look up immediately. He was finishing a line of script in a ledger, his hand large but steady. When he did, his eyes, the color of a winter sky, took in the scene without a flicker of surprise. He was older, with a magnificent silver beard that covered his chest, but his shoulders were still square, his presence absolute. This was a man who had never been in a hurry and never been late. "Afternoon," he said, his voice a low rumble. He looked at Rowan, who was now slumping against the wall, a dark, wet patch of blood spreading on the floor. "He needs a doctor, not a marshal. He needs you first," Evelyn said, her voice a raw croak. She dropped her saddlebag onto his desk. The oilcloth parcel landed with a heavy, definitive thud. "I am Evelyn Hart, from Ash Hollow. This is Rowan Pike. These men," she gestured to the prisoners, "are paid employees of Barclay Voss. They tried to murder us in Raven's Pass to stop us from bringing you this." She untied the parcel. She laid out the forged bank ledger, the blue ink receipts, and finally, the stolen telegraph logbook. Marshal Luther Gaines looked at the pile of paper. He looked at the bleeding man. He looked at the prisoners. He stood, walked to a pot-bellied stove, and poured a thick, black stream of coffee into a tin mug. He pushed it across the desk toward Evelyn. "Doc Miller is 2 doors down," he said. "Tell him I sent you. Get that arm stitched." He looked at the prisoners. "You three, you're in federal custody." He unlocked a holding cell in the back of the room and motioned with his head. They scrambled into it. "Then," Gaines said, sitting back down, "you and I will talk about this paper." An hour later, Rowan was back, his arm crudely stitched and heavily bandaged, his face pale but his eyes clear. He refused the chair, leaning against the wall, a silent, watchful presence. Evelyn, fueled by the marshal's bitter coffee, laid out the story. From the first slap in the street to the coded messages, her voice was low, precise, and cold with a controlled fury. When she finished, Gaines leaned back, his chair creaking in protest. He steepled his fingers, his gaze unreadable. "A hell of a story, Miss Hart," he said, his voice betraying no sympathy. "A well-documented one, too." He tapped the logbook. "This is bad. The blue ink, that's clever." Evelyn felt a surge of hope. "But," Gaines continued, dashing it, "it's not enough. Not enough." Evelyn stood so fast her chair almost tipped. "They tried to kill us. I have witnesses." "You have road agents," Gaines corrected her, nodding to the cell. "Which is all they'll claim to be. Voss will disavow them. He'll say they're thieves who saw an opportunity. And this," he tapped the ledgers, "is a financial dispute, a very messy one. Barclay Voss is a name I know. He has associates in Cheyenne. He has senators on his payroll. I take this to a judge. Voss's high-priced lawyer will tear it apart in 10 minutes. He'll paint you as a desperate, failed businesswoman. And him." He nodded at Rowan. "As a hired gunman, I need more than paper. Miss Hart, I need a seal. I need a confession. I need something that ties the money to the gun." The hope that had carried Evelyn 100 miles turned to ash. She slumped, the exhaustion of the past 3 days hitting her like a physical blow. The silence in the office was broken by a sudden, frantic clatter. The telegraph key in the corner of the room, manned by a young deputy in a green eye shade, began to chatter to life. It was tapping in a fast, urgent rhythm. "Marshal," the deputy said, his voice high with confusion, I'm getting a wire from Ash Hollow. It's not code. It's a statement addressed to you by name." Gaines was on his feet. "Take it down, word for word." For 5 minutes. The only sound was the rhythmic click-clack-click of the key and the scratching of the deputy's pen. He finally ripped the page from his notepad and handed it to the marshal. Gaines read it, his expression unchanging. He read it a second time. "Marta Green," he said, looking at Evelyn. "Your telegrapher. She fled," Evelyn said, her voice hollow. "She didn't flee far," Gaines said. "She went to the next town over, doubled back, and got to her office an hour after you left. This is her full, sworn statement. She lists the dates, the times, and the destinations of every coded message Voss sent. She explains the codes. Repricing of water equals denial of water rights. Adjusting terms equals authorized forgery. And she signed it as a federally licensed telegraph operator. She sent it to every marshal's office in the territory." He smiled. A rare, cold thing. This is the seal." He turned, the telegram in his hand, and walked to the cell. He opened it and dragged out the gunman whose hat Evelyn had shot. "Your name is Ames," Gaines stated. "You're a hired hand from the Tumbleweed Ranch. Except it's not. It's owned by a holding company, the Voss Reserve Fund." Ames's face went gray. "Your partner's in there." Gaines jerked a thumb. "They're already talking. They're telling me how Voss paid you, how they're just ranch hands, but you were the one who threw the rock. You were the one who tried to kill the horse. That's attempted murder of a federal witness. Ames, that's a rope." "No," Ames panicked. It wasn't like that. We wasn't hired to kill anyone, just to stop them, scare them." "Scare them how?" Gaines's voice was soft, dangerous. Just to fence the water, that's what he called it. We was paid to fence off Dry Willow, make it look like the creek was drying up. We got paid from the fund, $20 a week. Just to make folks nervous, make 'em sell. The fire at the Davidsons. That was just to send a message. "And this," Gaines pressed, "in the pass. Voss said they were carrying bank money, said it was his. He said stop them, get the money, and dump the bodies. He said no one would ever look for a failed shopkeeper and a drifter." Gaines let him go. Ames stumbled back into the cell. The marshal walked back to his desk. He sat. He pulled a stack of crisp, new federal warrants from a drawer. He dipped his pen. "Now," he said, "I have the gun, and I have the money." He began to write, his pen strokes broad and angry. "I'm issuing a temporary injunction, freezing every asset tied to the Voss name in this territory, the bank, the ranch, the holding companies, everything. We've got him." He signed the first page with a flourish. "But it's temporary. It's only as good as my signature. To make it stick, to seize his property, I need a district judge to sign off on it." "So, we find one," Evelyn said, her voice shaking with relief. "He finds us," Gaines said, sanding the ink. "Judge Cyrus Black. He's due on the morning stage. He's a hard man, but he respects the law. He'll be here by 10 o'clock. We present this with the testimony, and he'll make it permanent." A polite, sharp rap on the office door. Before Gaines could answer, the door opened. A man in a tailored black suit stood on the threshold, holding a fine leather satchel. He was smiling, but his eyes were like polished stones. "Marshal Gaines," he said, his voice smooth as oiled silk. "My apologies for the intrusion. My name is Harriman. I represent the financial interests of Mr. Barclay Voss." He stepped inside, his gaze flicking from Evelyn to Rowan, to the prisoners in the cell. His smile did not waver. "It seems there has been a gross misunderstanding. My clients, employees," he gestured to the cell, "appear to have been overzealous in protecting his property. A matter of trespassing. You see, I see a lot of things," Gaines said, his voice a low growl. "And I'd advise you to step back. Son, this is a federal office. Of course, Harriman said. We are all friends of the government here. He placed his satchel on the corner of Gaines's desk and opened it. It was filled with neat, paper-wrapped cylinders of gold coin. Mr. Voss is a pillar of the community. He understands that the law can be a complicated and expensive venture. He wishes to contribute to the operational expenses of your office, to ensure this misunderstanding is resolved quickly, quietly. He pushed the bag forward. The dollar always finds the right path. Marshal, Mr. Voss is prepared to be extremely helpful. Rowan, silent until now, pushed himself off the wall. He's offering to bribe a U.S. Marshal. Harriman's smile vanished. I am offering a donation, sir, from a concerned citizen. Gaines looked at the gold. He looked at Harriman. He slowly, deliberately, picked up the hot, black coffee pot from the stove. You know, Harriman, he said, walking toward the lawyer, my operational expenses are covered, but this floor, it's filthy. He upended the coffee pot. The entire contents, thick and steaming, poured directly into the lawyer's open satchel, flooding the gold coins, scalding the fine leather, and splashing onto Harriman's immaculate boots. The lawyer shrieked, jumping back, a cloud of bitter steam rising from his bag. Now get out, Gaines roared, his voice filling the room. Get out of my office, and you tell Barclay Voss I'll be seeing him, soon. Harriman, his face white with rage and humiliation, grabbed his dripping, ruined bag and fled. Gaines turned back, the anger fading, a grim weariness replacing it. He's rattled, but he's also running. He's running straight to Judge Black. The stage doesn't get here till 10. He'll ride out, meet it at the relay station. He'll have 3 hours alone with the judge before I ever see him. 3 hours and a bag of clean gold. This, he tapped the warrant, might all be for nothing. The office door burst open again. It was Josie. She was covered in grime, her clothes torn, her face streaked with tears and sweat. She was holding the heavy shotgun, its muzzle pointed at the floor. She stared at Evelyn, her eyes wide, and burst into sobs of relief. Josie, my God! Evelyn ran to her, grabbing her. Why are you here? The post! I had to. Josie panted, clinging to her. After you left, I heard them. At the saloon, Cale and that bank clerk, they were drunk. The clerk, he was laughing. He said Voss was a fool, keeping a brag book. He said he'd cleaned up all the bank ledgers, all but one. He said Voss was so arrogant, he kept a private one. Josie, what are you saying? The flower. Josie pulled a slim, blue-bound ledger from inside her coat. It was stained and dusty. The spoiled shipment Voss sent back. He told me to burn it. I was clearing the barrels. There was a false bottom in one. He hid it and forgot about it. Evelyn took the book. Her hands were trembling. It wasn't a bank ledger. It was a private journal, a cash book, and on the first page, in Voss's own arrogant script, Voss Reserve Fund expenditures. It was all there. Payment to B, Ames, T, Brody, J, Cale Water Fencing, Dry Willow, $50. Payment, Kerosene Davidson Property, $5. Bonus Ravens Pass Interception, $100. It was a confession, but there was more. Tucked into the back cover, folded, was a hand-drawn map. It was the Dry Willow Creek. It showed every small ranch, and over it, in the same bright blue ink, was a new plan. A plan for a large dam, a central reservoir, and lines, rerouting the entire creek, directly and solely to the Highhorn Ranch. Evelyn laid the blue book on Gaines's desk. She placed it next to the forged contract, next to the telegraph logbook, next to the prisoner's confessions. The coded telegrams, Evelyn said, her voice shaking, pointing to the log. The blue ink to forge the contracts. She pointed to the receipt. The shadow fund to pay the gunmen. She tapped the blue ledger, and the map, the motive for all of it. The chain was complete, a perfect, closed, ironclad loop of federal crimes. Marshal Luther Gaines stared at the desk. He looked at the wounded gunman, the brave shopkeeper, and the terrified, loyal assistant. He looked at the evidence that would destroy the most powerful man in the territory. He slammed his massive fist onto the desk. The sound echoed like a gunshot. He's done. Gaines was a new man. The weariness was gone, replaced by a cold, bright fire. Harriman thinks he's going to meet a judge. He is, but we're not waiting for that stage. He grabbed his hat. Ash Hollow Founders Day. It's in 2 days. The whole town will be there. They'll have bunting. They'll have speeches. The governor's aide is scheduled to speak. He looked at Evelyn, and a true, dangerous smile spread across his silver beard. This year, so are we. We are going to unmask that bastard in front of God, the governor, and every single person he ever tried to break. Ash Hollow's Founders' Day was a mandatory celebration. It was the one day a year the town decorated itself in bunting, pretending it was a civilized place. A brass band, painfully out of tune, murdered a Sousa march in the town square. Booths offered apple pies, watery cider, and games of chance. The red, white, and blue flags hanging from every awning seemed bright against the backdrop of dust. On the newly built wooden platform in front of the town hall, Barclay Voss was the picture of prosperity. He wore a fine black tailcoat, a silk vest, and a starched white shirt. He was the benefactor, the founding father, the engine of progress. He beamed at the assembled crowd, nearly the entire population of the county, who had been ordered by the bank to attend. "And that is what we are building here," Voss boomed, his voice smooth and practiced. "Not just a town, not just a stop on the railroad. We are building a future, an empire of commerce and stability, built on the bedrock of trust and hard work." He paused for the polite, obligatory applause. It was thin. The crowd was restless. Their faces sullen. They had heard these speeches before, usually right before their interest rates went up. Sheriff Keeler stood at the side of the platform, sweating in his own formal coat, looking more like Voss's bodyguard than a peace officer. "We look forward," Voss continued, "to a new year of growth, a new era of—" He stopped. The crowd's attention had shifted. A murmur, like a rising wind, was sweeping from the back of the square. 4 riders were coming down the main street, not ambling, not riding fast. They moved at a steady, funereal walk, a pace of absolute, grim purpose. At the lead was Marshal Luther Gaines, his silver beard a stark white against his black duster, the U.S. star gleaming on his chest. Beside him rode Evelyn Hart. She was not in her work dress. She wore her father's canvas duster, the sleeve still showing the tear from the branch. The bruise on her cheek was a defiant, ugly badge. On her other side, his left arm in a heavy sling, his face pale but his eyes like chips of iron, was Rowan Pike. Behind them, tied to a lead rope, stumbled 2 men, hands bound, shuffling in the thick dust. The crowd recognized them. It was Ames and another of the Highhorn Ranch toughs. The procession did not stop at the edge of the crowd. It moved through the crowd. People parted, scrambling to get out of the way, their murmurs turning to gasps. The 4 riders and their prisoners stopped directly in front of the speaker's platform. Barclay Voss stared, his smile frozen, turning to a mask of confusion, then to a dark, rising fury. "Marshal Gaines," he called out, his voice tight. "This is an interruption. We are in the middle of a civic ceremony." "So are we, Mr. Voss." Gaines's voice rumbled, loud enough for the entire square to hear. "A federal one." Gaines and Rowan remained on their horses, flanking the platform, creating a line no one could cross. Evelyn dismounted. She walked with a stiff, steady grace, not even looking at Voss. She walked straight to the wooden pillars holding the platform's awning. From her saddlebag, she pulled a massive, rolled sheet of canvas. With 2 deliberate motions, she unrolled it. It was a huge, hand-painted enlargement, a perfect copy of her original loan agreement with the Voss Bank. "Good afternoon, everyone," Evelyn said, her voice, clear and carrying, cut through the sudden silence. The band had stopped playing. Mr. Voss was just speaking about bedrock and trust. I'd like to read from the bedrock of my own business. Voss's face was turning a deep, apoplectic red. Miss Hart, this is not the time or the place. My loan for the freight house, which all of you know is being called due, Evelyn continued, her voice rising, is based on this contract, Section 4. She pointed with a long, steady finger. It reads, payment due in full on the 1st of August, 1881. There is no clause for early collection. She reached into her pocket and pulled out her own forged ledger. She held it high. This is my bank ledger. It contains an addendum, a forgery, claiming I am in default. An addendum written... She paused, her eyes sweeping the crowd. In a very particular, very bright blue ink. The crowd stared, confused, but intrigued. This was better than a pie contest. Calumny. Voss roared, using the French word for slander, a word meant to show his sophistication, to place him above them. This is libel, Sheriff. Arrest this woman for disturbing the peace. Sheriff Keeler looked at Voss, then at Marshal Gaines. He put his hand on his gun, but he did not draw it. He stayed frozen. The ink, Evelyn said, was a mistake. It was arrogant, because that same blue ink was used to sign the order to freeze the Boulders Rise payroll. She looked at the miners in the crowd. Which is why you weren't paid. And that same ink was used on a map detailing how to dam and reroute every drop of water in Dry Willow Creek. A collective, angry gasp went up from the ranchers at the back. Lies, Voss shouted, his composure cracking. The woman is hysterical. She has no proof. I do. A new voice, Marta Green, who had been hidden by the side of the platform, stepped out. She was pale, trembling, but she was there. She held her official telegraph logbook in her hands. Mr. Voss, Marta said, her voice shaking but gaining strength, sent 13 coded messages from my office to his associates in Denver. I have the log, and I have the code. She read from the page. On October 12th, advise client to adjust terms on asset 401. That, she looked at Evelyn, was the day the forgery appeared in Miss Hart's book. On October 14th, recommend immediate repricing of water access, Sector B. That, she looked at the ranchers, was the day the surveyors showed up at Dry Willow Creek. The crowd was no longer murmuring. They were a low, rumbling growl. They were turning, as one, to look at the man on the platform. This is a conspiracy, Voss yelled, his voice now high and cracking. A fantasy. These women are deranged. There is no connection between any of this. Then I guess you'd better explain this, Josie Milburn said. Josie stepped from behind the platform, and she was holding the slim, blue-bound private ledger. She held it up for everyone to see. Mr. Voss's brag book, Josie said, her voice clear as a bell. The one he kept for himself, the one he hid in a flour barrel. She opened it to a marked page, a cash book for his reserve fund. I'll just read one entry. October 17th, expenditure kerosene, Davidson property, $5. The night the Davidson farm burned. A woman in the crowd screamed. And this one, Josie continued, her voice merciless. Payment B, Ames and Company, waterway protection, Dry Willow, $50. And this one, just 3 days ago, bonus Ravens Pass interception, $100. She held the book up high, the page open. And it is all here, in his own hand, with his own signature, B. Voss. The crowd exploded. It was not a riot. It was a single, unified wave of fury. The people in the front row surged forward, not toward Voss, but just forward. Their faces were dark. The fear was gone, burned away by the truth. Barclay Voss looked at the faces. He saw no fear. He saw no respect. He saw only judgment. That's enough. Marshal Gaines's voice cut through the noise. He urged his horse forward, right to the edge of the platform. He unhooked a paper from his saddle, the federal warrant. Barclay Voss, Gaines boomed, his voice silencing the square. By the authority of the United States government, I have here a warrant for your arrest for conspiracy to commit fraud, conspiracy to commit murder, interstate wire fraud, and arson. You are under arrest." Voss was cornered. He looked left. He looked right. He looked at Sheriff Keeler. "Amos, do your job. Arrest this man. He's trespassing. He's inciting a riot." Sheriff Amos Keeler finally moved. He pulled his pistol, his hand shaking, and stepped in front of Marshal Gaines. "Now, hold on, Marshal." Keeler stammered, his face a mask of sweat. This is a town matter. We don't need federal—" Gaines did not even look at Keeler. He looked past him, at the crowd, at the miners with their calloused hands, at the ranchers whose water had been stolen, at the women whose friends had been threatened. Not a single person in the crowd moved. They just stared. They stared at Amos Keeler. It was a heavy, suffocating, terrifying silence. It was the silence of 100 people who were no longer afraid of one man, but were now united in their hatred of another. Keeler saw it. He saw the end of his authority. He saw the end of his salary. He looked at the hard, unforgiving faces. His hand, holding the pistol, began to tremble violently. The gun wavered, slowly. His shoulders slumped. He lowered the pistol, the barrel pointing at the dusty floorboards. He licked his lips. I surrender." He dropped the gun. It hit the wood with a hollow, pathetic clatter. The sound of that gun dropping was the sound of Voss's world ending. He was truly, finally, alone. Rowan, seeing the moment, began to move his horse, coming around the platform to cut off the escape. Voss acted. He was not a fighter. He was a bully, and a cornered bully is a coward. He looked around, his eyes wild, and saw him, a young, thin man, barely 19, who rang the church bell and swept the saloon. He was standing near the steps, his mouth open, watching. Voss lunged. He grabbed the young man from behind, locking one arm around his throat. With his other hand, he pulled his own silver-plated Schofield. He jammed the barrel into the young man's temple. "Back!" Voss screamed, his voice a raw, ugly tear in the air. "Everyone, back, or I'll kill him, I swear to God. I'll kill him." The crowd recoiled in horror. The young man, his eyes white with terror, choked, his feet dangling. "Let him go, Voss," Gaines said, his voice low, his own hand now on his gun. "No, you back away. All of you, drop your guns. Drop them." Voss began to drag the hostage backward, away from the platform, his eyes darting. He was retreating. Step by step, he was moving toward the end of the street, toward the largest, loudest, and most dangerous building in town. The sawmill. "He's running," Evelyn whispered, her hand finding Rowan's. "Not running," Rowan said, his eyes fixed on the retreating figure. "He's changing the battlefield." Voss, dragging the boy, kicked open the wide door of the sawmill. He disappeared with his hostage into the screaming, sawdust-filled darkness, the huge industrial saws still running, oblivious to the human drama. The inside of the sawmill was a mechanical hell. The air was not air, it was a thick, choking fog of pine sawdust, so dense it blurred the edges of the world. And the sound was a physical assault. It was the high, screaming zowie-ing of the main circular saw, a 5-foot disc of spinning, insatiable steel that threw sparks as it tore through a massive log. It was the rhythmic, pounding thump-clack of the steam engine, the slap of drive belts, and the grinding roar of the gears that moved the log trough. Barclay Voss was at the center of it. He had dragged the sobbing young bell ringer to the far side of the room, using the heavy, automated log carriage as a moving shield. He was cornered, his tailcoat ripped, his face slick with sweat and streaks of grime. The silver-plated Schofield was pressed hard against the boy's head. "Gaines, you call your men off!" Voss shrieked, his voice barely audible over the machinery. You let me ride, or this boy dies." Marshal Gaines, Rowan, and Evelyn stood just inside the massive, open doorway. The terrified, silent crowd pressing in behind them. A wall of witnesses. Gaines had his hand on his gun. "Let the boy go. Voss." Gaines bellowed, trying to pitch his voice over the din. It's over. It's over when I say it is. Rowan, his left arm bound tight, his face a mask of pained concentration, ignored the shouting. He was scanning the factory. He was not a banker. He was a scout. He was reading the terrain. He saw the spinning saw, the steam engine, the chaos. But he also saw the logic. High above them, running the length of the building, was a narrow iron catwalk, and at the far end of it, near the massive, groaning flywheel, was a large, red-painted iron lever. It was the main water valve, the sluice gate that fed the steam engine's boiler. It was the heart. He didn't point. He didn't speak. He caught Evelyn's eye. His gaze moved, sharp and deliberate, from her to the iron stairs in the corner, up to the catwalk, and then to the red lever. He looked back at her. The machine, not the man. Stop the machine. She understood. While Gaines moved to the left, drawing Voss's attention, his voice a low, placating rumble, Evelyn slipped away. She moved into the shadows, past stacks of cut lumber, her boots silent in the deep sawdust. The noise was her shield. The chaos was her cover. She reached the iron stairs. They were steep, narrow, and vibrating from the engine. She began to climb, her hand on the cold, greasy rail. She moved steadily, not rushing, not looking down. She was high above the floor now, a shadow among the rafters. The whole scene laid out below her. She saw Rowan, his one good arm braced on a pillar. She saw Gaines, trying to negotiate, and she saw Voss. His attention diverted. She took 3 more steps on the catwalk. A loose plank rattled. Voss heard it. He looked up, his eyes, wild and bloodshot, locked with hers. He saw her. He saw the lever. "No, get down!" he screamed, his voice cracking with panic. He yanked the hostage back, pressing the barrel of the Schofield so hard it left a ring on the boy's skin. "Back off, all of you. Get down from there, you witch, or he loses a finger right now, I'll do it." The boy let out a choked, terrified sob. The crowd behind the marshal moaned. Evelyn stopped. She was 10 feet from the lever. Her hand was shaking. She looked down at the man who had struck her, who had burned a man's farm, who had tried to have her murdered. She saw the pure, undiluted terror in his eyes. He was not a lion. He was a rat in a trap. She took a deep breath, and her voice, clear, sharp, and feminine, cut through the mechanical scream. She pitched it high, so every person in the crowd could hear, "You won't!" Voss stared, momentarily confused. "What I will, I'll do it." "No," Evelyn said, taking another step. "You won't. You're a coward, Mr. Voss. You don't do your own killing. You pay men like them." She pointed, her finger like a spike, toward the prisoners still tied up outside. "You use paper. You use ink. You use fire in the middle of the night. But you won't do this. You're afraid." "Afraid of you," he laughed, a high, ugly sound. "You're afraid of the blood," she said, her voice dropping, cold and sure. "You won't shoot. You can't stand the thought of getting his blood on your clean suit." She saw his face twist. She had found the nerve. It was not a threat to his life. It was an insult to his vanity. That he could not bear. He snarled, his mask of civilization gone, and he cocked the hammer of the Schofield. "You think I won't?" Evelyn didn't wait for the answer. She ran. She ran the last 10 feet and threw her entire body against the heavy iron lever. It didn't budge. It was stuck, sealed with rust and pressure. Voss, seeing her desperation, seeing her failure, laughed. He turned his attention back to Gaines. "Now, Marshal, you will." Evelyn grabbed the lever again. She hooked her foot on the railing. She used every ounce of her strength, her fear, her rage. She pulled. The lever groaned, a shriek of tortured metal, and moved. 1 inch. The high-pitched zing of the massive saw blade faltered. It dropped a single note. Encouraged, she pulled again, straining, her muscles screaming. The lever moved again. The sound of the sawmill died. It did not die quickly. It was a slow, agonizing mechanical death. The zing became a zai-un, which became a zhur, which became a low, grating groan. The drive belt slapped and went slack. The log carriage jolted to a halt, and then silence. The sudden, absolute quiet was more shocking than the noise. It was a physical vacuum. The only sound in the vast, sawdust-filled room was the boy's terrified, gulping sob, and the hiss of the steam engine's pressure valve. In that silence, a new sound, a quiet scuff from above. Voss looked up. Rowan had used the noise, and Evelyn's diversion, to climb. He was on one of the massive crossbeams, directly above Voss's head. His left arm was useless, but his right hand held his coiled lariat. He didn't throw it. He didn't have to. He just dropped it. The loop, weighted and true, fell. It didn't land over Voss's head. It fell perfectly. His good arm pinning Voss's gun arm to his body, the rope pulling tight just as Voss tried to raise the pistol. "Got you," Rowan gritted. Voss, trapped, roared like an animal. He twisted, fighting the rope, his finger jerking the trigger of the Schofield. He fired, not at the boy, not at Evelyn. He fired, wildly, straight up. The bullet, a .45 caliber slug, tore a massive splinter of wood from the beam. Inches from Rowan's face, the explosion, the recoil, and the violent twist were too much. Rowan, with only one good hand, lost his balance. He didn't slip. He fell. He fell 10 feet, landing on the sawdust-covered floor with a heavy, sickening thud and a sharp, audible pop. He cried out, a raw, guttural sound, as his right shoulder, his good shoulder, dislocated from the impact. He was now on the ground, his body convulsing in pain, completely defenseless. Voss, his arm now free of the loosened rope, saw him. The boy, in the confusion, had scrambled away. Voss's face, a mask of pure, murderous hatred, turned to the man on the floor. He raised his pistol, taking careful aim, to finish it. No, Evelyn, who had run down the stairs the moment the saw stopped, launched herself through the air. She dove, landing on the hard floor between Voss and Rowan. Her arms spread wide, her body a human shield. She was on her knees, panting, looking up at the man who held the gun. The man who had, finally, lost everything. "This ends," she gasped, her voice raw. "It ends here." She pulled the federal warrant from her duster, the paper crumpled and stained. She didn't hand it to him. She shoved it in his face, so close he had to cross his eyes to look at it. "You lose by your own signature, by your own hand. It's all here you lose." It was not the gun. It was the paper. It was the sight of his own failure, in writing, held by her. It broke him. With a scream that was more animal than human, he lunged. He dropped the gun, his hands clawing, not to hit her, but to tear the paper, to destroy the proof, to destroy her. But Evelyn was on his territory. This was a mill. She was a freight master. She knew tools. As he lunged, she didn't retreat. She pivoted, her foot slipping in the sawdust as she sidestepped. Her hand grabbed a tool leaning against the silent log carriage, a peavey, a heavy, 5-foot hickory pole, tipped with a sharp steel spike and a swinging iron hook. She didn't have time to swing it. She didn't have the strength. She used its purpose. As Voss charged past her, she planted the butt of the heavy pole on the floor and, with both hands, pivoted the shaft directly into his path. Voss, running blind with rage, hit the pole at a full charge. The thick hickory shaft caught him across the shins and knees. His legs were knocked from under him as if by an axe. He pitched forward, arms flailing, and landed, face first, in a shallow pit of grease and wet sawdust, his fine tailcoat ruined. He spluttered, trying to rise, but before he could move, Evelyn was on his back. She didn't have cuffs. She grabbed the back of his expensive leather belt, unhooked the buckle, and with a single, violent, practiced motion, yanked it free from his trousers. She looped it, tight, around his wrists, pulling it so hard the leather bit into his skin, and cinched the buckle. It was crude. It was effective. It was, for Barclay Voss, the ultimate, final humiliation. the double doors of the sawmill burst open. The crowd, which had been a terrified, silent mass, surged in. They stopped, their eyes wide. They saw their tyrant, the man who owned their debts and their lives, face down in the muck, tied with his own belt, defeated by the woman he had tried to break. Marshal Luther Gaines walked through the crowd, his face like carved stone. He pushed Evelyn gently aside. "I'll take it from here, Miss Hart." He knelt, pulled a pair of iron cuffs from his belt, and snapped them onto Voss's wrists, removing the humiliating leather belt. "Barclay Voss," he said, his voice quiet but final. "You are under arrest, for all of it." He hauled the sputtering, grease-covered, and utterly broken man to his feet. Gaines turned, his eyes scanning the crowd. He found Amos Keeler, standing near the door, his face the color of old milk. Gaines walked toward him. He didn't speak, he didn't threaten. He just reached out and, with one finger, hooked the tin star on Keeler's vest. He ripped it free, the fabric tearing. He looked at the badge in his hand, then pocketed it. In the vast, silent sawmill, a single person. Josie began to clap, her hands, loud and sharp. Then, Old Man Hemlock, then the miners. It was not a cheer. It was a roar. It was a physical, shuddering release. It was the sound of 100 people, held hostage for years, finally breathing out. It was the sound of Ash Hollow, gasping and coming back to life. The silence that fell in the sawmill was heavier than the machinery it replaced. It was a thick, dusty quiet, broken only by the sound of Barclay Voss weeping into the grease and the harsh, ragged sound of Rowan Pike trying to breathe through a wall of pure, white-hot agony. Evelyn rushed to him, her hands hovering, not knowing where to touch. His face was gray, slick with sweat. His good arm, his right, was now trapped at an unnatural angle against his chest, the shoulder clearly, terribly, dislocated. "Don't," he gritted, his eyes squeezed shut. "Don't touch it." "We have to get you to the doctor," she whispered, her voice thick with sawdust and the metallic taste of fear. "In a minute," he panted. He forced his eyes open, and through the pain, he looked at her. He scanned her face, her arms, her hands. "Are you hurt?" "No," she said, a sob catching in her throat. "I'm not hurt." Marshal Gaines was hauling Voss to his feet, the man's fine suit now a ruined, dripping mess. The crowd, silent and awestruck, parted as Gaines dragged the prisoner out of the dark mill and into the bright, accusing sunlight of Founder's Day. Evelyn put her hand under Rowan's good elbow, ignoring his wince. "Lean on me. We're getting you out of here." He leaned, a dead weight, and together they staggered onto the sawmill's wide plank porch. The air was fresh. The brass band's music was still gone. The entire town was watching. Voss, cuffed and held fast by Gaines, was being marched toward the jail. He was still a man of arrogance, even in defeat. He stopped, twisting in the marshal's grip, and looked back. He looked past the crowd, his eyes finding Evelyn and Rowan on the steps. His face was a mask of filth and hatred. "You haven't won," he screamed, his voice raw. "This is my town. I'll be back. I'll tear this place to the ground. I'll own your bones. I'll be back." The crowd flinched. The threat, even from a cuffed man, still had power. Rowan, leaning heavily on Evelyn, took one painful, shuffling step forward. He stood as straight as his body would allow, the sawdust in his hair catching the light. He looked at the man who had embodied everything he'd ever hated, everything he'd ever run from. His voice was not a shout. It was a low, flat, final statement, hard as cured hickory, and it carried across the entire square. He won't do it again. It was a judgment. It was a promise. It was the closing of a ledger, written in his own blood and pain. Marshal Gaines didn't say a word. He just yanked Voss forward, cutting off any reply, and continued the march to the jail. The crowd watched him go, and this time, when he disappeared into the small brick building, the fear did not return. The square which had been frozen in tension, seemed to exhale. People turned, not to their homes, but to each other. They looked around, dazed, as if waking from a long, terrible dream. Marshal Gaines returned to the platform, his face grim. He held up his hand for silence. "People of Ash Hollow," he said, his voice booming. "As of 10 o'clock this morning, by federal authority, the Voss Bank and all associated properties are hereby seized. They are frozen, pending a full federal investigation." A low murmur. "The men who burned the Davidson farm and attacked Miss Hart in Raven's Pass are in custody. Their signed confessions and Mr. Voss's own ledgers will be presented to a federal judge in Cheyenne." The murmur grew, becoming a sound of disbelief. "And finally," Gaines said, his voice softening just a fraction, "all foreclosure proceedings are halted. All water rights revert to their original registered deeds. The water is yours." For a moment, nothing. The town processed the words. Then, Old Man Hemlock, his face cracked and dusty, let out a single, whooping cry, and the sound that followed was not a roar. It was a wave of weeping. Women held each other. Miners sat down, hard, on the ground, dropping their heads into their hands. It was the sound of a crushing, suffocating weight being lifted. The celebration resumed, but it was not the forced, hollow party of the morning. The brass band, retrieving their instruments, began to play. And this time, the music, though still out of tune, was joyous. People were laughing, truly laughing, the sound rusty and strange. Evelyn watched them. She watched her town, her father's town, come back to life. She turned, the noise fading, and looked at Rowan. He was still leaning against the sawmill post, his eyes closed, his face pale, exhausted, and covered in grime. He looked done, like a soldier whose war was finally, truly over. She walked to him, stepping into his shadow, blocking the sun. "Rowan," she said softly. He opened his eyes. "You still owe me," she said, her voice trying to be light, though it trembled. "You owe me a hug that isn't interrupted by bullets, or falling, or Barclay Voss." A slow, tired smile touched the corners of his mouth. It was the first real smile she had ever seen from him. It transformed his face. "I do," he said, his voice rough. "But I'm a little short on arms. I only need one," she said. He looked at her, his gaze intense, searching, then wincing. He pushed himself off the post. Standing on his own, he raised his one good arm, his right, and held it open. An invitation. Evelyn didn't hesitate. She stepped inside his reach, into the small, protected space he offered. She didn't just hug him. She pressed herself against his solid, warm frame, her arms circling his waist, holding him up. She rested her cheek against his chest, against the rough fabric of his shirt, and she heard it. Beneath the shouting of the crowd, beneath the terrible brass band, beneath the noise of a town reborn, she heard the single, strongest sound in the world, the slow, steady, stubborn thump-thump of his heart. It was not the frantic, terrified hammering of the storm. It was not the pained, racing beat of the fight. It was a rhythm, deep and sure. It was the sound of a foundation. It was the sound of a home. She closed her eyes, breathing in the scent of him pine, sweat, gunpowder, and the faint, sweet smell of his skin. She held him, and he held her. His one good arm wrapped around her shoulders, his chin resting on the top of her head. They stood like that for a long time, an island of stillness in the middle of the celebration. "Well, now," a cheerful voice said, breaking the spell. They looked. Josie was standing there, a wide, knowing grin on her face. Marta was beside her, her eyes red, but smiling. Josie looked at Evelyn, still wrapped in Rowan's arm, and her grin widened. "I'm just guessing, ma'am, but I'm thinking the post office is closing early tonight." Evelyn laughed. It was a real laugh, a sound that felt as rusty as the town's. A few people nearby heard, and they laughed too, a warm, shared, knowing sound, the tension, the last, thin, A vibrating wire of it snapped. Rowan, still holding her, leaned down. He lowered his head until his lips were against her ear, his breath warm, his voice so low, so quiet, that it was a vibration just for her, lost to the rest of the world. "Evelyn," he whispered, and the sound of her name in his rough voice made her shiver. "My whole life, I've been running from men like Voss, running from places like this, running from myself." He paused, and she felt his chest rise and fall in a long, shaky breath. "But I'm tired of running," he whispered. If you'd have me, I'll stay. I won't run anymore." Evelyn pulled back, just enough to look up at his face. His eyes, dark and pained, were also, for the first time, completely open. There was no shield. There was no cynicism. It was just him. He was offering her the last, broken, and most valuable thing he had, his future. She didn't answer him with words. The town, the warrant, the bank. That was all paper. This was the bedrock. She reached up, her hand, stained with grease and his blood, and placed it gently on his unshaven cheek. She rose on her toes, and she answered him. She kissed him. It was not the desperate, frantic kiss from the storm. It was a slow, warm, and profoundly certain kiss. It was a promise. It was an anchor. It was the sealing of a contract that no man, no bank, and no bullet could ever break. It tasted of survival, and it was longer and stronger and worth more than all the cheers in the square. He held her, his one good arm locking her against him, and he kissed her back, a man who had finally, after a lifetime, found his ground. And as the celebration roared around them, they stood as one. Two survivors, planted firm in the unforgiving, unyielding, and now, finally, their red western dust. Thank you for listening to this story. We'd love to connect with you. Please, drop a comment below and let us know where you're hearing this from, and share your thoughts on Evelyn and Rowan's journey. We invite you to subscribe to Wild West Stories 1850 like the video, and support us further by hitting the hype button to make this story and this video heard by more people.